Chapter 487. Listening to Belle's flirting skills, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips. He really didn't care. Although Jiang Hai is a casual person, under normal circumstances, he won't be too casual, especially when the situation is not very clear, so he just looked at the people in the distance who are fighting, then picked up the wine in front of him and took a sip. "Brother, what good wine do you have here?" Looking at the bartender who is still playing with the glasses, Jiang Hai asked him. "Beer or white wine?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the bartender looked at him and asked. For Jiang Hai, a customer who is willing to spend money, his attitude is very good, and his face is smiling. Of course, the white wine in his mouth is not the white wine in China, but the foreign wine. "Either is fine, I'll ask first." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai shrugged and said to him. "Beer is mainly bottled Corona and Buhamer, and we also have homemade beer, and it's very cheap, but I advise you not to try it, because you may not be used to it. As for white wine, we mainly sell rum here. If you want, the quality of this thing is quite good." Looking at Jiang Hai, the bartender here said seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also touched his chin. He has heard of Corona and Buhamer before, but he really hasn't tasted them before. He remembered that he saw a post on the internet, mainly introducing the top 10 best-selling beers in the world. Among them, the most powerful is Huaxia's Snow, which has been ranked first in the world for many years. Of course, the main sales target is the Chinese. In foreign countries, especially in the Western world, almost no one knows what kind of beer Snow is, and few people have drunk it. Everyone agrees that the best-selling beer in the world is Budweiser light beer, which is also rare in China. Because it is a very light beer, and there is a clear lemon flavor. It is more like a cocktail than a beer, but it has the taste of beer. The 8% concentration is very good, and it is somewhat similar to the fruit beer in China. Jiang Hai also likes this beer. He bought this beer when he was in the United States. In third place was the normal Budweiser beer, and in fourth place was Corona beer. The origin of this beer was Mexico. It tasted similar to light beer, but the concentration was slightly higher. If anyone could drink light beer, then this wine would make people unknowingly drink too much. However, this beer brand was later acquired by Budweiser. Currently, it was mainly sold in the American market, especially in the southern part of the country. Ranked 5th is Schurl beer. This beer is not a major brand in the US, UK, or Huaxia. Few people had seen this beer. Its main markets were Africa and South America, but it was not available in Puerto Rico either. In 6th place was Heineken. There was no need to introduce them further. In 7th place was Silver Bullet. Not many people knew about this brand, but their sales in the US were the second highest in China. Currently, they had not expanded overseas, so not many people knew about them. In 8th place was Merlot beer, and in 9th place was Buhamer beer. Their main market was South America, and their biggest market was Brazil. During the World Cup last year, this beer was really popular for a while. The beer in 10th place was called Asahi beer. Needless to say, this name represented its main market and origin, Japan. So now that he heard the bartender's words, Jiang Hai was really interested. "Give me a glass of each of the 3 beers you mentioned, and give me a glass of rum." Jiang Hai looked at the bartender in front of him and smiled. The bartender's reaction was not slow. After Jiang Hai finished speaking, he had already poured a glass of each beer for Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai drank the locally brewed beer first. But when it was imported, Jiang Hai almost spat it out. "It tastes terrible, right? There's nothing we can do about it. We lack fresh water here, and we even have to import it from overseas. Everyone's daily consumption of fresh water is limited, so the water used to brew this beer is evaporated from the ocean. It's no wonder it tastes good. If it weren't for the fact that this beer is cheap, we wouldn't drink it." The bartender looked at Jiang Hai and smiled as he explained. Puerto Rico is a country with a poor economy. They had declared bankruptcy in 2012, which was why they wanted to join the United States so badly. But the US is a group of tycoons, and they will not agree if there are no benefits. Puerto Rico had no specialties, and it was not a strategic location. Third, the only influential voting rights, customs, and defense in the world were all in the hands of the United States. They did not need this country to become their 51st state, because it would not create any wealth for them. Moreover, there would be an additional 1.8 million unemployed people. What would happen to Social Security then? What about medical insurance? What about the residents? Just the government's expenses are a huge sum of money, and the US does not have much ambition for their country. They were not like the Russians. They only cared about money. If they were willing, North America would have already belonged to the Americans. Canada and Mexico are not a problem. Maybe they have fought all the way to South America, and they do not have any concept of glory. Okay. After wiping his mouth, Jiang Hai put the glass of beer on the table, then picked up the 2 bottles and drank. He took a sip of Corona, and it was not bad. It was similar to light beer, but the alcohol content was slightly higher. This is not bad. The taste of Bahamas is very strong. It is not a light beer, but an ordinary beer. Jiang Hai put it down after 2 sips. Then he tasted the rum, which made his eyebrows twitch. It was said that South America was the country of rum. Jiang Hai took a sip and felt that it was really good. South American rum was mostly brewed with sugar cane, so it had a sweet taste in its own body. When it is drunk, it is not so strong, and it is not as spicy as American rum or vodka. Instead, it is delicious when it is drunk, and it explodes in the stomach, making the body feel warm. This is quite to Jiang Hai's taste, so he looked at the bartender and took out a few $100s from his pocket. "Give me 3 boxes of Corona, and 10 bottles of this rum," Jiang Hai said to the bartender in front of him with a smile. "That's $315 in total. I'll charge you $300. Hearing that Jiang Hai wanted to buy so much, the bartender laughed. Then Jiang Hai took out 3 franklins and slapped them on the table. The other waiters had already brought the wine out. Of course, they also had to help carry the wine to the side of the boat. For this, Jiang Hai gave the young man a tip of $5. Fei carried 2 boxes of wine, and Jiang Hai carried 1 box of wine, 10 bottles of rum, the things they bought, and dinner. The 2 of them came to the side of his boat. As for Bell, let him go crazy here. He probably won't cause trouble. After delivering the things to the place, Jiang Hai also gave the waiter $5 and let him leave. Jiang Hai called down Harem and Ferns, and the 2 of them carried the things up. At this time, the 4 people on the boat had already eaten dinner, but they were still quite interested in the local specialties that Jiang Hai brought back. They were quite happy after eating. They played here until around 10 o'clock, before Jiang Hai drove them back to their rooms to sleep. He also went to sleep. He didn't forget that the girl named Kevin said that they would come over at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. It was a quiet night. Although Bell was a little wild, he didn't stay overnight and came back around midnight. After Jiang Hai knew that he was back, he slept even more soundly. When the sun slowly rose from the sea level the next day, Jiang Hai also woke up from his sleep. Walking out of the room, the sea breeze outside blew, and Jiang Hai instantly woke up a lot. Because he had lived by the sea for so long, Jiang Hai was also very familiar with the big temperature difference by the sea. The 2 places with the biggest temperature difference in the world were the desert and the sea. In the desert, because the sand didn't absorb heat, it reflected heat during the day, so the temperature in the desert was very high. However, at night, because the sand didn't absorb heat during the day, there was no sun at night, and no heat was emitted, so it was very cold. The sea was similar to the desert, and the temperature difference was also quite big. Getting up in the morning, even Jiang Hai couldn't help but have goosebumps all over his body. Fortunately, he was prepared and put on his coat. Looking at the foggy sea in the distance, Jiang Hai walked to the plate armor. After adapting for a while, he began to move. By the time he finished his activities at 5:50, the fog on the surface of the sea has almost dissipated. It seems that today's weather is good. The sun shines on the sea, making the sea clear. Even Jiang Hai's boat has a lot of small fishes. "Hey, handsome, you're so early." Just as Jiang Hai was about to move and wake everyone up, a bell-like voice rang out. Then Jiang Hai looked over and saw the girl named Kevin, who he met last night. She was walking over with 4 other girls. The 4 girls were wearing the same clothes as last night. However, each of them was carrying a small bag. Seeing Jiang Hai standing there, they waved their hands vigorously. "Come on up." Seeing the arrival of the 4 girls, Jiang Hai also waved to them and put down the stairs on the boat. Not long after, the girls climbed onto Jiang Hai's boat. Looking at the luxurious yacht in front of them, their eyes couldn't help but be particularly bright. Speaking of which, these girls were playing on such a beautiful yacht for the first time. Looking at the bright eyes of these girls, Jiang Hai smiled and said to them, "You can rest in the living room first. You can watch TV here. I'll wake my people up and then make breakfast. We'll go after eating." Chapter 488. Whatever you say, boss. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl named Kevin from yesterday also said excitedly. When Jiang Hai went to the cabin to call them, these girls were also very bold, regardless of whether Jiang Hai is a bad guy or not. They just sat directly on the sofa of Jiang Hai's yacht, feeling the touch of the leather sofa under their buttocks. It really made them extremely excited. They have never been to such a good place before. Just as they were touching here and there and looking around curiously, Jiang Hai had also called Delina and the others. After everyone got up, they first went to wash their faces and brush their teeth. Then Delina and Marian went to help Jiang Hai make breakfast. As for Belle, Azalina, and Harriman also came to the living room. When Belle saw these girls, his eyes narrowed and he greeted them with a smile. Unfortunately, these girls were not very interested in Belle. Only one of them smiled and nodded to him as a greeting. The other 3 girls directly ignored him and whispered to each other. Not long after, Jiang Hai and the others came out with a large pot of soup. This is the first dish Jiang Hai learned to make after coming to the United States, besides frying steak, cheddar soup. Speaking of this soup, it is a very famous food in the Boston area. This thing is traditionally called New England clam cheddar soup, but after coming to Boston, you can actually put anything you want in it. Even if you want to put lobsters, crabs, and other things in it, you can put them in. Jiang Hai put some big shrimps this time. Compared to clams, he prefers to eat these things. Of course, there are also chopped abalone, sea cucumber slices, and some clam meat in it. Of course, there are also dough balls in it. If you just drink the steam, you won't be full. This is the first time Kevin and the others drank this kind of soup. After drinking it, they couldn't help but give Jiang Hai a thumbs up. It really tastes good. After all, Jiang Hai's products are all things he brought from his manor. We're full, so we're about to set off. Tell me, where should we go? Not long after, the meal was almost finished. Kevin's 3 companions were still very conscious. They knew that after eating Jiang Hai's food, it was necessary to help clean up. So after everyone finished eating, they carried their bowls into the kitchen, and Jiang Hai asked Kevin, "What is it?" "That depends on what you want to catch. If you want to catch tuna, you have to drive east. If you want to catch lobsters, you have to drive southeast." Upon hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin stood up, picked up his phone, and zoomed in on the screen. Then, he told Jiang Hai about it. It seems that she really knows the environment here very well. According to her, different fish go to different waters. The barracuda had to go to the northeast, and the tuna had to go to the east because the sea there was deeper and there were more tuna. Not only were there ordinary tuna, but there were also many bluefin and yellowfin tuna. However, there was a problem. If they caught these fish, it would be troublesome to sell them. Although there were people who collected fish in Puerto Rico, the price was not high. If you want to sell them at a high price, you have to go back to Miami to sell them. The price difference is about 20%. Jiang Hai doesn't care about this, because this is not his main purpose. If he really catches a rare fish, then he can also chill the fish or freeze it directly. Of course, the price will be reduced if he freezes it. However, Jiang Hai doesn't care about the small amount of money. He has enough bluefin tuna in his fishing farm. He came here to have fun. After confirming that he caught tuna, Jiang Hai also started the engine. After Belle went to the shore to untie the rope, he quickly rushed back to the boat. Then, the boat rushed to the east as Kevin said. With the departure of the ship, the fog on the surface of the sea completely dispersed. The warm sunlight shone on the sea. The sea absorbed a small amount of heat, but most of it was reflected into the air, causing the temperature of the sea to rise rapidly. At 8:30 a.m., the temperature outside had already reached 20 degrees Celsius. Seeing this, Kevin and the other girls couldn't sit still in the living room anymore. Therefore, they directly took off their jackets and trousers in front of Delina, Marion, Azaviel, Harriman and Belle. In a split second, they had already put on a set of bikini swimsuits. Are you going out to swim? The boat is still sailing. Looking at them, Delina felt that it was necessary to remind these girls who were about the same age as her. Of course not. Although the weather outside is hot, the sea water is still very cold. We are preparing to go fishing. We took off our clothes because it would be troublesome if we accidentally fell into the sea or got scratched. Hearing Delina's words, Kevin also smiled and said with a serious expression on his face. Fishing? Okay, I'll call Jiang. Hearing that they were going to start fishing, Delina was stunned for a moment. Then, she ran to the captain's cabin to call Jiang Hai. To be honest, Jiang Hai was also interested in fishing. After setting the coordinates and letting the boat sail automatically, Jiang Hai took his fishing equipment and walked out of the cabin. Although Jiang Hai hadn't fished for tuna before, Edward Anderson and the other old sailors were experts in fishing for tuna. Therefore, they have already prepared everything for Jiang Hai to fish for tuna. For example, there are 5 or 6 poles with thick fishing lines and bait that tuna likes. Now the boat is still sailing, although the speed is not particularly fast. However, it was impossible to use 5 or 6 fishing rods directly, so Jiang Hai could only use 1 fishing rod. However, Jiang Hai wasn't very clear about what he was going to catch. He just walked out with a fishing rod. Hey, boss, what are you doing? Seeing Jiang Hai walking out with a long fishing rod, Kevin and the others who had climbed onto the platform at this time couldn't help but ask strangely. Didn't you say that you were going to fish? I'm here to join in the fun. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be speechless. What do they mean? Do they mean that they don't want me to join in the fun? It really makes him a little embarrassed. The boat hasn't stopped yet. How can you catch anything with this fishing rod? Is there any other seaweed? We are fishing for some bait now. You see, we all use this. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin couldn't help but laugh. Then he opened his small bag and took out a lot of bundles of lines from it. These lines are fishing lines, but they are very thick and have at least 50 or 60 pounds of tension. Generally, this kind of line is not very common in sea fishing. On the heads of these lines, there are a few big fish hooks tied with some silk threads and lead. What's going on? Jiang Hai has seen fake bait before. But at least, no matter how fake the bait is, it should at least look like a small fish or a worm. What the hell is this colorful line? As if seeing the doubts in Jiang Hai's eyes, Kevin also explained. Here, we use this thing to fish. The fish caught with this thing is the bait, and then we use this bait to catch the big fish. Hearing her explanation, Jiang Hai was even more confused. What's going on? Facts speak louder than words. Looking at Jiang Hai's confused look, Kevin and the others didn't care. They just smiled and tied the end of the rope to a fixed place on the floating platform. Then they threw the money into the sea and didn't care about it anymore. Looking at their appearance, Jiang Hai held the fishing rod and didn't know whether to move forward or retreat. It was quite awkward. But soon, he was not embarrassed anymore. Just as he was about to take the fishing rod back, a girl who was with Kevin suddenly laughed and shouted, then began to pull a fishing line back. Seeing her actions, not only Jiang Hai, but everyone else on the boat looked at her in surprise. She took the bait? Yes, she took the bait. As the girl pulled hard, a small fish about 20 centimeters long was pulled to the shore by her. Looking at this fish, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be taken aback, because this fish is not someone else. Although it is very small, Jiang Hai can recognize that this is a tuna, but it is not an expensive species. Now it is pulled to the platform, it is still moving there. Wow, it's really a fish. You guys are amazing. Are we going to eat this for lunch today? Looking at the tuna they caught, Delina and Marion also ran down and asked them with envy. Of course not. Of course not. Look at this fish, it's called Little Letany. Look at the tire pattern on both sides of it. This fish can't be eaten. This kind of tuna doesn't grow big and its meat is very old. It tastes like a cooked tire. This is the bait for us to catch the big fish later. Hearing Delina's words, Kevin explained to her with a smile. Hearing her words, Delina was also very excited. Seeing their eager look, the girls here took the initiative to take out 4 fishing lines for them. After taking the fishing lines in their hands, Delina and Marion also sat on the floating platform. After learning from these girls, they fixed the fishing line on the floating platform and pulled it from time to time. Then they also chatted with each other. After all, these girls are about the same age, so they still have some common topics to talk about. As for Jiang Hai, after seeing that they can really catch a fish, he was already a little ashamed. He smiled awkwardly and took the fishing rod back to the cabin. It's better for him to sail the boat. As for Delina and Marion, with Azalina watching over them, nothing will happen. But at the same time, Jiang Hai also made a decision in his heart. It seems that fishing like this is quite interesting. After these little girls get off the boat, when he has time, he will also try it out. Without a fishing rod, without a bait, can he really catch fish? It's wonderful to think about it. Chapter 489. Wow, another one, another one. As another small tuna was pulled up, Daliana exclaimed excitedly. Hearing her voice, the girls around her also smiled kindly. Good job. At this time, a girl sitting next to her who came with Kevin said to Daliana in very stiff English. Hearing her words, Daliana also smiled. They had been fishing here for almost half an hour. Because they didn't need to check whether the bait was still there or not, after all, the silk thread wouldn't disappear. They just needed to pull it from time to time to see if the pulling force was right. If the pulling force was right, they would directly pull it up, and there was a high chance that they would catch a fish. Although only half an hour had passed, at this time, there were already a lot of fish in the fish trough behind these girls. Of course, they were all small tunas. The speed of the boat wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. Most of the fish couldn't catch up with the boat, but tunas were the fastest fish in the ocean, so it wasn't troublesome for them to catch up with the boat. It was precisely because of this that the fish they caught were basically small tunas. In addition, there was only a small octopus, which was probably hung on the hook and was pulled up. Young people always made friends quickly. In this half an hour, Kevin, Daliana, and Marion had basically become good friends. They also knew some of their situation. For example, they weren't Jiang Hai's women, but Jiang Hai's daughters. They lived in Boston, but didn't go to school. They also knew the situation of Kevin and Marion. These 4 girls were from a small town. Except for Kevin, they also knew the names of the other 3 girls. However, these 3 girls didn't speak too often. This was because their English was similar to the English of ordinary students in Huaxia. It was written in English, which was very troublesome to speak. Therefore, they spoke very slowly, and sometimes it was easy to get the meaning wrong. However, Daliana didn't care about it. No matter what it was, as long as they could speak it, it would be enough. As for why Kevin's English was so good, it was because her cousin had emigrated to the United States. That family was quite impressive. When she returned to China, she never spoke Spanish. She only spoke English, but it also helped her practice her spoken English. Kevin's English was quite famous in the small town. It was precisely because of her good English that it was not difficult for Kevin to find a job in Puerto Rico. They were now studying in high school in Puerto Rico. However, they would graduate in a year. After graduation, these girls would have to look for jobs. They wouldn't consider going to college. Besides, there weren't any good universities in Puerto Rico. Unless Puerto Rico could join the United States next year, but that was also impossible, and they knew it very well. Wow, it's really hard to imagine that that guy is actually your father. I'll say something that might cause you to misunderstand. I really thought that he found you. Hee, but how could he adopt you? You should know that the two of you are not that far apart. He is also a young man with that kind of ability. Aren't you afraid of being taken advantage of if you live with him? After watching Daliana take the fish and throw the fishing line back into the sea, Kevin asked strangely. I've seen some cartoons and movies before. They always say that single men or women who adopt children have some ulterior motives. At this moment, a girl next to her also whispered. Ulterior motives. Hee, I know what you are talking about, but Jiang is not that kind of person. Don't worry, if he wanted us, he would have done it a long time ago. We don't hate him. If he needed us, we would have given it to him a long time ago. Daliana didn't care about Kevin and her companion's questions. After a chuckle, she began to explain. What she said was also the truth. Although she still didn't understand what dependence, what worship, what liking, and what love was, deep in her heart, she didn't feel disgusted doing some shameful things with Jiang Hai. Americans are really. Okay, forget we said anything, but why don't you go to school? You can make a lot of friends if you go to school. Looking at the slightly addicted eyes of Daliana and Marian, Kevin shrugged and wisely changed the topic. However, this topic was obviously not something that Daliana could talk about because it involves a secret. According to the place marked by Kevin, Jiang Hai's ship sailed for about an hour and arrived at the sea area. At the same time, Jiang Hai also took out the map in his mobile phone and took a look. The map he took was naturally the location of those shipwrecks. This tuna spot was about 5 nautical miles away from the location of the shipwrecks. The place was really not far. Of course, it was definitely impossible to go there during the day, but Jiang Hai was prepared to come back at night to take a look. As the ship slowly stopped, everyone also came to the floating platform. Jiang Hai glanced at the harvest of these girls, and he couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Because these girls really harvested a lot of small tuna. There were more than 100 of them, almost filling up the tank. When the ship stopped, Kevin and the others had already stood up. Although the other 3 girls weren't as good as Kevin in terms of the position on the sea, they also grew up in this small town after all. They were still very good at dealing with fish. After standing up, they each took out a knife from their bag. They directly killed the fish, then cut off the fish head, pulled out the internal organs and put them aside. After that, they directly cut the fish into 2 pieces. This was the bait used for fishing. Seeing their actions, Jiang Hai and the others also came down and began to help. It took almost another hour to finish more than 100 fish, and then they began to cut it. For example, if you are fishing for barracuda, this fish's mouth is not small, but it likes to bite, so when fishing for this kind of fish, the meat has to be more square. If you are fishing for loach, this fish's face is very flat, so you have to cut it thinner. If you are fishing for black tuna, another name for bluefin golden spear, this fish is very big, so you need to cut the fish into bigger pieces. I know there are a lot of black tuna around here, but whether you can catch them depends on the situation. As for these internal organs and minced meat, they are the key to attracting these fish. While cutting the fish pieces, Kevin introduced them to Jiang Hai. I really don't understand this very well. This is your problem as a guide. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled. He really didn't understand this, but he was a little lucky to have hired a reliable guide. Then listen to me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin smiled and then began to throw the internal organs and minced fish pieces into the sea. Jiang Hai knew that she was luring the fish over. Some fish are purely carnivorous, some are omnivorous, but no matter what kind of fish it is, they all eat fish. Especially internal organs with blood, there is no animal that doesn't like to eat them, because these internal organs contain a lot of calories and fat, which is different from humans. Animals like these things very much. With these messy things thrown into the sea, it didn't take long for a large number of fish under the sea to be attracted. Of course, the fish that came over were just some small fish, the most numerous of which were small fish such as anchovies and herring. And these small fish are the main source of food for large fish. Seeing that the small fish began to pile up, these girls also picked up the fish pieces they liked and strung them on the fishing line they brought. Jiang Hai also set up the 6 rods and put the largest piece of fish on them, waiting to catch tuna. Tuna won't be hooked so quickly. Are you sure you don't want to catch some barracuda or something to play with first? Looking at Jiang Hai's movements, Kevin asked him with a smile, but Jiang Hai didn't want to change the bait. He came here to fish for tuna and there was no need to fish for anything else. But this idea was shaken after 5 minutes because the girls over there took the bait. Wow! With the exclamation of one of the girls, a long fish that looked like a knife was pulled out of the water by her. This fish is not small, about 80 centimeters long. Its head is a bit like a hairtail, and it has a mouth full of big sharp teeth, but its body is much thicker than a hairtail. Seeing this fish on the fishing line, Delina and Marion immediately wanted to help their new friend, but before they went forward, Kevin had already stopped them. At the same time, they picked up the knife and directly smashed the fish to death with the back of the knife. After the fish stopped moving, they went forward to remove the hook. This fish is called barracuda, commonly known as sea wolves. It's very fierce. When this fish is in a group, even sharks don't dare to provoke them. Look at their big teeth. If you're accidentally bitten, you'll bleed. It's very troublesome. Seeing that the fish has been taken down, Kevin explained to Delina and the others why he didn't let them come forward to help. Hearing Kevin's words, Delina and the others also nodded. If Kevin didn't say it, they really wouldn't have known. Jiang Hai next to them was also a little embarrassed. In fact, he didn't know either, but now is not the time to expose himself, so he still prepared to fish for tuna very seriously. But an existence like tuna, which can almost be regarded as a top predator of the ocean, is really not so easy to appear. While Jiang Hai was waiting for tuna, Kevin and the others took the bait again, this time 3 barracuda in a row. Chapter 490. Barracuda, since they are called sea wolves, they do have some similarities with wolves. For example, they live in groups. Barracuda move in schools. If one is caught, it means that there is a school nearby. As the 3 fish were quickly pulled up, Kevin and the others continued to put down the fishing line. This time, Delina and the others also went to help. Watching them pull the fish up one by one, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips. Azalina, Belle, and Harriman, who were not interested in the fish, also ran to the floating platform at this time. Helping to catch the fish is nothing more than waiting for the fish to be pulled up, then directly knocking the fish to death. They are very good at doing this. TSK, they are really King lucky. My fish, quickly take the bait. Looking at the fish being pulled up, Jiang Hai's face was expressionless, but he still cared a little in his heart. It's really shameful for him to lose to these little girls. However, it was a pity that fishing was not up to him. It would be strange if he could fish it up just because he said so. Because the bait on his fishing rod was too big, the sea wolves couldn't swallow the bait in one bite. If they didn't swallow the bait, then they wouldn't be able to catch the fish. Therefore, Jiang Hai quickly threw out several pieces of bait. However, he didn't manage to catch any big fish. This made Jiang Hai lose face. They are only catching small fish, I want to catch a big one. Looking at the barracuda that are still being pulled up, Jiang Hai took a deep breath and comforted himself with this reason. But at this moment, Kevin suddenly exclaimed in the distance. Then, under her forceful tug, a broad back appeared on the surface of the sea. Oh my God, this fish is so big. Hearing Kevin's exclamation, Delina and the others also looked over. But after seeing it, they couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. The size of the fish exposed at this time is about 1 meter, and the tail fin is not completely exposed, so they don't know the exact size, but at least they can be sure that this fish is definitely more than 1.5 meters long. A 1.5 meter long fish is already a big fish. Looking at the faint golden glow on the dorsal fin under the sunlight, Kevin and the rest's eyes lit up. Don't move, this is the yellowfin golden spear. It's too strong, we can't pull it up. Watching Delina, who was going to help him, Kevin threw away the string in his hand. After that, he took out a pair of thick working gloves from her bag and quickly put them on. After that, he took out a wooden stick and started to stir the string. One of her friends also put on a pair of gloves and began to fish. Anyone who had fished before would know that fishing in the sea was different from fishing in the river. This was because there were often some big and fierce fish in the sea. For example, tuna. This kind of fish was big and strong. If one used an ordinary fishing rod to catch it, it would be very difficult for people to grasp it. That was why there was the saying of fishing rods. Jiang Hai's 5 or 6 fishing rods were all fishing rods, but none of them have taken the bait yet. When such a big fish took the bait, what people had to do was to fight with the fish and consume most of the fish's strength underwater. Only then could the fish be brought up. However, although the tuna was not small, its endurance was not bad. But it wasn't a difficult fish to catch. First, it was because the fishing lines used by Kevin and the rest were quite thick, and there was no fishing rod. The tuna couldn't pull the boat away, nor did it have the strength to break the fishing rod. Second, this kind of fish can't jump. Jumping fish were more difficult to catch because when the fish jumped, the fishing line must be retracted instantly. Otherwise, the hook might fall off in the air. The most famous fish that can do this was the big sea silver carp, but this kind of fish didn't exist in the Atlantic Ocean. But even if it existed, Jiang Hai probably wouldn't fish it, because this kind of fish meat was soft and had a lot of bones. Fishing was a very good fish species, but it wasn't good for eating. The locals basically used it as salted fish when they caught it. On the other side, Kevin and her little friend had been fighting with this guy for about 20 minutes by the side of the boat. The struggle of the fish gradually slowed down. If they really went to Cape Cod like Edward Anderson said, it would be very troublesome to catch this kind of tuna. He also had to look at the fish's trajectory and pay attention when fishing. Generally speaking, when fishing for tuna, especially large tuna, there was a 60% chance that the fish would escape the hook, but it was precisely because of this that it was fun. When the fish was about 10 meters away from the boat, Kevin and the rest called Harriman to come over and help. After slowly pulling this guy to the side of the boat, Harriman was really powerful. With such a big body, its strength naturally wouldn't be small. It directly lifted the fish by its chin and dragged the huge yellowfin golden spear towards the ship's floating platform. After reaching the platform, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at it, his eyelids couldn't help but twitch. This tuna is about 1.8 meters long and weighs at least 130 kilograms. This is Harriman. Otherwise, if it was Bell, not to mention pulling the fish up, he would probably have to go down himself. Of course, Jiang Hai also has the strength to do so. It's not the biggest, but it's not small either. Hang it up and kill it. She quickly tied the fish's tail with a rope, and then put it on a crane above the plate armor of the boat. Kevin urged Belle to hang the fish up and told Harriman to kill it quickly. Harriman also took her knife and gestured there. As mentioned before, Tuna breathed by crashing into a machine. Even if it was kept in a pool on the shore, it would die quickly. So what they had to do now was to drain its blood before it died. It was true that fish were cold-blooded animals, but it didn't mean that their blood was always cold. The so-called cold-blooded animals referred to the blood in their bodies, which would change according to the changes in the surrounding temperature. It didn't mean that their blood was cold. When they were fishing, the fish was constantly struggling. After exercise, people's blood would become hot, let alone fish. When the fish's blood was hot, if the fish died, the blood would enter the fish's meat and produce lactic acid, which would make the fish taste very bad, especially for tuna, which had to be eaten raw. Jiang Hai and the rest didn't know much about this, but fortunately, Kevin understood it very well. Under her command, Belle hung the fish up. Then Harriman killed the fish and drained its blood. After cleaning up the blood, Harmanley and Belle laughed. To be honest, they were just starting to feel the joy of having fun. In the first 8 days, it was basically Jiang Hai playing, and they just watched TV and enjoyed the scenery. Now that there was something they could do, they were still very happy. This fish is about 130 kilograms. According to our standards, if the meat is good, it can be sold for more than $1,000. Uncle, since this fish was caught on your boat, let's split it half and half. After thinking about it, Kevin looked at Jiang Hai and said excitedly. She went to sea with Jiang Hai and didn't care about the $50 guide fee. She was doing this for these fish. One must know that catching this fish is equivalent to her family's monthly income. No need, it's all yours. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also waved his hand. He didn't care about this small amount of money. What he cared about was that since Kevin and the others knew that he was the father of Delina and Marion, they no longer called him boss, but uncle. These guys really didn't learn anything good. Hearing Jiang Hai say that the money from selling the fish would be his, Kevin also narrowed her eyes and smiled. She immediately took Harriman and brought the fish into the ice room that Jiang Hai had prepared. There, Jiang Hai specially prepared a water silo for the fish that he caught. He put a lot of ice in it to keep the fish fresh and tender. Uncle, do you want me to give you a line? After working for a long time, Kevin also came out of the water silo. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little speechless, she couldn't help but tease Jiang Hai with a smile. In her opinion, Jiang Hai's fishing rods were useless. No need. Although they were having fun playing with each other, Jiang Hai also had self-respect. It was not so easy to make him surrender like this. But looking at the barracuda that filled the water tank and the yellowfin, Jiang Hai felt that if he continued to fish like this, it might be really difficult to get any fish. After thinking for a while, he took the fishing rod out of the water again, but this time, he didn't use the bait. Instead, he returned to the yacht's kitchen. When he reappeared, he had a piece of beef in his hand. Wow, beef, and it looks good. Uncle, you're not going to use this thing to fish, are you? Seeing Jiang Hai coming down with the fish, Kevin and the others couldn't help laughing and shouting. Of course, why not? Hearing their words, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows and said with a serious face. I'm not fishing for crocodiles. Tuna eat beef? Seeing that Jiang Hai was really going to fish with beef, the 4 girls here couldn't help laughing. They had never seen anyone use beef to fish for tuna. Let me show you. Hearing their laughter, Jiang Hai chuckled. Maybe fish don't eat beef, but that's ordinary beef. Is his beef an ordinary guy? This is his trump card. Jiang Hai cut off a piece of beef that weighed about 3 ounces. He hung it on the boat's pole and then threw it into the sea. This was his killer move. P.S. Below is the advertisement time. Because they are afraid that you can't see it, they posted it in the chapter. Of course, these words are free. I recommend XX God's competitive work, Super Trainer, the most awesome XXXXX competitive football novel, Friends who like to read this kind of novel must not miss it. Chapter 491. Hey, is your dear dad crazy? He actually wants to use beef to fish? Looking at Jiang Hai, who had set the bait again, Kevin couldn't help but say to Daliana and Marian in surprise. Her words could be considered as a pun, because Dalina and Marian really liked Jiang Hai. Using the term dear was indeed a bit, too ambiguous. As for whether she meant it or not, who knew? Hearing her words, Daliana and Marian's little faces couldn't help but blush, but they quickly recovered. You don't understand, just wait and see. Looking at Kevin, Daliana shook her head and said with great interest. It seems that you really don't understand fishing. The bait for fishing should be suitable, not how much it is worth. Hearing that the two sisters seemed to be very confident in Jiang Hai, this made Kevin a little speechless. Indeed, fishing should be about whether the bait was right or not how expensive the bait was. This was very clear to all experienced fishermen. For example, in China, there were many veteran cadres who liked to fish. And these people had already summed up a principle. They were very clear about what kind of fish liked to eat. As the old saying went, sing a song when you go to a mountain, and put the bait when you catch a fish. Grass roots, that is, grass carp like to eat various kinds of corn, vegetables, grass leaves, and other bait mixed together. Crucian carp like to eat red worms, steamed buns, and some insects. Carp like to eat snails, shrimps, earthworms, silkworms, pig hydrazine, raw meat, and so on. Black carp also like to eat insects, snails, small fish, shrimps, and so on. Tilapia, snakehead, fathead, catfish, all kinds of fish naturally like to eat all kinds of things. The same was true for sea fish, and beef, was indeed not one of the usual things for fishing. Of course, it didn't mean that beef couldn't be caught. Beef could only be caught for those fish that weren't too picky. Those fish that were greedy, such as barracuda, still liked to eat beef very much. As for tuna, some of them weren't too picky, but Jiang Hai's target was bluefin or yellowfin, which were still very picky. Just wait and see. Our beef is not ordinary. Although they didn't know whether Jiang Hai's mystery had anything to do with this beef, Daliana and Marian trusted Jiang Hai from the bottom of their hearts. Moreover, they also knew that Jiang Hai's beef wasn't ordinary. If it was ordinary, would it be so expensive? One must know that the manor's main source of income came from the beef, not from selling fish. Alright, looks like you guys won't give up until all hope is gone. Let's wait and see. Seeing that the two little girls were so supportive of Jiang Hai, Kevin shrugged helplessly, indicating that he was waiting for a miracle to happen. However, just as her voice fell, before she could take a breath, Jiang Hai's fishing line had already snapped. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be happy. He knew that he got hooked. Then, he straightened the fishing rod in an instant, and then quickly turned the rollers. Jiang Hai and these girls had one thing in common, that is, he also liked violence. Moreover, ordinary fish really couldn't withstand his violence. He felt that the pulling force of this fish under the water at this time might be the strongest among all the fish he had ever caught. It was even stronger than the first time his big fool was hooked. But he was no longer the same person as before. In the past, he only had the strength of a human, but he could easily deal with this fish. Not to mention now, Jiang Hai directly picked up the fishing rod, then began to turn the rollers quickly. If the other fishermen saw him like this, their jaws would probably drop off in shock. What kind of joke is this? Usually, when people fight with fish, the person will drag the fish out of the water until it's tired. Jiang Hai is now directly forcing the fish out of the water. Is there a mistake? Is this a joke? When did the battle between a person and a fish become a competition of strength? And most importantly, when did a person on the shore have the strength of a fish? Seeing Jiang Hai pulling the fish back, Kevin and the others looked at each other. The other three girls curled their lips, because they thought that if the fish can be pulled back like this, it proves that the fish is not big. But Kevin faintly felt that something was wrong, because the fish stirred up a lot of waves in the distance. Just as she was a little curious, a long dorsal fin that was bigger than the one she had just caught emerged from the water. It shone with a strange golden light under the sunlight. Seeing this, her mouth couldn't help but turn into an O shape in surprise. Oh my God, it's also a yellowfin, and it looks like it's bigger than Kevin's. Seeing this scene, the three girls next to her were also stunned. What's going on? Is there anyone who can catch this kind of fish with pure strength? Simple and crude, without a trace of skill to speak of, but it still caught the fish. Looking at the straight line that was almost as thick as a chopstick, they couldn't help but sigh for the fish. This fellow was really unlucky to have provoked a humanoid magical beast. This yellowfin tuna is clearly not a good fish, and the most important thing is that it is still very strong. Jiang Hai did not slip away from it, nor did he fight it, but directly pulled it over. A tuna that can grow so big is destined to be not young, and it is very likely that it has been caught by others before. Seeing that it was not Jiang Hai's opponent and was getting closer and closer to the floating platform, the fish did not panic and run around. Instead, it accelerated and rushed to the bottom of the boat. This is also a trick of the tuna, rushing to the hull. If the fishing line is scratched by the bottom of the boat, it can be easily broken. Would Jiang Hai give it such a chance to escape? But would Jiang Hai give it such a chance? Looking at the yellowfin tuna drilling to the bottom of the boat, Jiang Hai shouted, "Get up!" At the moment when the tuna rushed over, Jiang Hai used his arms and directly swung the fishing rod. The tuna on this side did not think that it would be forcibly thrown out of the sea by others. With a bang, the fish has emerged from the sea, and then it was heavily thrown on the floating platform by Jiang Hai. However, although the fall was not light, the fish was still very tenaciously moving, hoping to return to the sea. But how can Jiang Hai give it such a chance? He went up and hit the guy's head directly with the rod, temporarily stunning the fish. Then he took the rope thrown over and put it on the fish's tail. He gestured to Belle, and Belle, who was still on the other side of the crane, immediately started the crane and pulled the tuna up. This time, Harriman, who was already experienced, stepped forward to bleed the fish. "Oh my God, Uncle, your fish is 2 meters long and at least 180 kilograms. How did you do it? Are you a human or a monster?" Looking at Belle and Harriman, who were dealing with the fish, Kevin walked over with a confused face and looked at Jiang Hai in disbelief. She had never seen anyone like Jiang Hai in her life. She was very sure that the meat of this fish must be about the same. If her fish could be sold for $1,000, Jiang Hai's fish could be sold for at least $1,000. She was a little happy just now, but now it seemed that this uncle really didn't lack her money. Of course, call me Uncle Monster in the future. Jiang Hai didn't care about being called uncle. He rubbed Kevin's head, who was already in a daze. Jiang Hai laughed, turned around, and was about to put the beef on the fishing rod again. But at this time, another fishing rod, which had already put the beef on it, began to turn around crazily again. There was no time to serve the beef. Jiang Hai went directly to the front of the fishing rod. Once again, he used the same trick. He lifted the fishing rod in an instant, straightened the line and began to reel in the line. These girls had already seen Jiang Hai's monstrous strength once, so they weren't surprised. But they all knew that Jiang Hai didn't catch a small fish, but an out-and-out big one. Looking at the fishing line that seemed like it would break at any time, they couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. When did fishing in the sea become so easy? For a 1.5-meter yellowfin, they wasted half an hour to get the fish. They also had to rely on Belle and Harriman to clean it up. Jiang Hai, on the other hand, only took a few minutes from the time the fish was hooked to the time he caught it. It was really infuriating to compare oneself to others. As the fishing line got shorter and shorter, the dorsal fin of the big fish also appeared on the surface of the water. This time, when the sun shone, Kevin and the girls couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Because at this time, under the sunlight, the back of the fish was clearly dark blue. Black tuna, it's really a black tuna. Looking at the big fish in front of them, Kevin couldn't help but jump up and shout. Although today she was clamoring to bring Jiang Hai and the others to fish for the bluefin golden spear, to be honest, she didn't have much confidence in her heart. Ever since the bluefin golden spear became a supreme delicacy in the eyes of the Japanese, the number of people who caught the bluefin golden spear all over the world suddenly increased by several times, or even dozens of times. Just like the words on Capital said, with so much profit, it would be strange if they didn't go crazy. But decades ago, to be exact, before the Japanese had become rich, World War I, World War II, and even after World War II, even in the 60s and 70s, this game was quite worthless. Some big fish farms would even mince this kind of fish and feed it to the chickens. In the past 30 years, the originally worthless bluefin golden spear had gradually reached the end of its road, and it had become a kind of economic protection fish species. This made some old fishermen couldn't help but feel that things were really unpredictable. P.S. During the advertisement time, I recommend the sports basketball novel, Basketball God, by Minced Meat and Big Eggplant. It is currently the top basketball novel on the website. It is the most awesome 6666666666666 sports basketball novel. If there are friends who like sports basketball, don't miss it. Chapter 492. He pulled the huge bluefin tuna out of the water with ease, and then did the same thing as before. He knocked it out with a stick, hooked its tail, drained its blood, and chilled it. Everything was so orderly. The only difference was that this fish was even bigger than the yellowfin that Jiang Hai caught just now. It was still 2 meters long and a little taller than Jiang Hai, but it weighed 200 kilograms. It was an out-and-out big fish. According to Kevin, the fish could be sold for at least $30,000. If it was sent directly to Japan, it would probably be sold for more than $50,000, but here, $30,000 was the highest price. Jiang Hai wouldn't go to Japan to sell fish for $20,000. The loss outweighed the gain. However, it turns out that bluefin are really rare. After Jiang Hai caught a huge bluefin tuna, he really didn't catch another bluefin tuna. He didn't even see a bluefin tuna that was more than a meter long. Although his beef was still very popular, his third fish was another yellowfin, and it was not small. The fourth fish was a shark, a bull shark. Unfortunately, this fish was a protected species in the Caribbean, and it was not allowed to be eaten even if it was caught. Therefore, Jiang Hai thought that saving a fish's life was better than building a 7-floor pagoda, so he let it go. The fifth fish he caught was an Atlantic sailfish, which was more than 2 meters long. It was not easy to see such a fish here. Jiang Hai still remembered that he once caught such a fish and sold it alive for $100,000. Unfortunately, there were fishing boats at that time, but Jiang Hai only had a yacht now, so he couldn't raise this fish. He could only kill it and drain its blood like a tuna, then chilled it. Anyway, it was a victory. After catching the fifth fish, Jiang Hai didn't want to use the hook again, because the warehouse he prepared was already full. After that, they had lunch at sea. It was a Caribbean-style lunch. Since it was Kevin and the others who were cooking, according to them, they could take them out to play. Most importantly, Jiang Hai said that the fish they caught belonged to them. This made them very excited, so they took the initiative to kill a few barracuda and made a Caribbean-style lunch. In fact, it was the same, just a simple meal. However, it was Jiang Hai's first time eating barracuda fish. He had to admit that the barracuda meat tasted pretty good. The meat of this kind of fish was similar to the garlic clove meat that was often mentioned in China, but it was shaped like strips. It tasted good, and the most important thing was that it was fresh and tender. After lunch, Jiang Hai and the others basked in the sun for a while. After chatting with each other for a while, they prepared to return. From here to the dock where Jiang Hai had set off, it took about 3 hours to drive slowly. Indeed, it was still early, but don't forget that they had to sell fish first, and the place to sell fish was on another dock. Under the guidance of Kevin, Jiang Hai drove the boat to the dock on the other side. After driving for about 2 hours, they saw the coastal dock. Compared to the dock in the town where Jiang Hai had stopped, this one was much bigger. Not only were there many high-rise buildings, but the greenery was also done well. On the dock, there were not only many large fishing boats, but also some small yachts, but compared to Jiang Hai's yacht, those were far worse. This is Aguadia, the biggest city in our area. It's also a good place for tourism. Looking at the huge dock in front of them, Kevin introduced it to Jiang Hai and the others. Hearing the envy in her words, Jiang Hai also smiled. She is still young now. Sometimes, the more prosperous the place, the better, at least Jiang Hai thinks so. As Jiang Hai's boat sailed into the port, many fishermen on the fishing boats here looked at them curiously. But compared to the surprise in the town where Jiang Hai had stopped, the people here were much more indifferent. Although Puerto Rico's economy was not good, although there was a shortage of fresh water, and although the people here were not very rich. However, it was the best choice for those who liked to travel but didn't have much money, and those who liked to emigrate but didn't have much money either. In many big cities in Puerto Rico, it was the place where millionaires with a net worth of around $1 million lived. $1 million was indeed a lot of money in the United States, but it was not a privilege at all. At most, you could be considered a white-collar worker with a better life, but $1 million was completely different in Puerto Rico. They used their American citizenship to buy houses and land here, and the local government did not dare to trouble them. With $1 million, they were rich in the local area. The quality of their spending here was very good, only $20 or $30 per visit, and not more than $100 per night. Of course, this was the information that Belle had found out last night, but Jiang Hai did not care. Because of the low price, the good familiarity, and the feeling of being superior, many Americans were willing to come here to play. Aguadia was also a tourist destination, so naturally, there were many foreigners here. After Jiang Hai and the others sailed into the dock, they did not stop there directly. Instead, they drove directly to the fishing company. This was the first time Jiang Hai had gone to the fishing company, but the way the people here looked at him made Jiang Hai feel a little strange. Generally speaking, when a boat sailed into a fishing company, it must have gotten fish, which meant that they were competing with the fishermen here for business. However, the people here did not seem to care. In fact, it was understandable. There were plenty of fish in the sea, and Jiang Hai was driving a yacht. How many fish could he catch? However, when they saw the fish on Jiang Hai's boat, many of them would probably regret it. It was Jiang Hai's first time here, but Kevin was a local. He directly took Jiang Hai to a fishing company in Spanish. Jiang Hai did not know what the name was, but Kevin said that this was the fishing company with the highest price among all the nearby fishing companies. In the Caribbean, fishing companies were the only thing that was not lacking. After all, the people here relied on fishing to make a living. When Jiang Hai's boat docked next to the fishing company, some of the nearby boats stopped what they were doing and looked at Jiang Hai with a mocking expression. They thought that Jiang Hai had stopped by the wrong boat. It was a very happy thing to be able to see the rich suffer. However, when the fishing company's hook pulled out a large yellowfin golden spear from Jiang Hai's cabin, these people could not remain calm. There were sounds of gasps and discussions everywhere. Looking at their expressions, Jiang Hai smiled. He liked to see these people's surprised expressions. It was very interesting. Wow, the fish is not bad. It's A grade. I'll give you $6 per kilogram. What do you think? Looking at the scale in front of him, the person in charge of counting asked Jiang Hai. Before Jiang Hai came here, he had inquired about the A-grade yellowfin golden gun. In the United States, a pound of yellowfin golden gun was about $4. 1 kilogram was definitely more than 2 pounds, which was $8. But here, it was only worth $6. He glanced at Kevin. This fish was hers. Hearing this person's words, Kevin also calculated in her heart. Her fish was 130 kilograms in total. $6 per pound, that was $780. Although it was a little less than the $1,000 in her heart, it was still okay, so she nodded. Then it's settled. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person here weighed again. It was 138 kilograms in total. Just as the person here was about to count, a white and fat old man came out and said to Jiang Hai with a smile, "Let's say it's 140 kilograms. I saw that you have fish in your boat. Young man, I'll sell you a favor." Listening to the old man's words, Jiang Hai and the others were stunned for a moment, but it didn't matter. After all, they made more money. "Hello, are you Americans?" When Kevin went to the side to count the money, the old man also came over and asked Jiang Hai with a smile. Jiang Hai and the others also nodded. Listening to the old man's accent, he should also be an American. "Oh, there are a lot of Americans here now." "That's right, after all, it's tuna season." "Huh, let me see what other good things you got." The old man heard Jiang Hai's words and said with a smile. At this time, Kevin had come back with an envelope. Needless to say, there must be cash in the envelope. Now that Puerto Rico is bankrupt, the banks here are useless. Except for Citibank's branch here, all the other banks have closed down. After all, Puerto Ricans who are not Americans don't trust Citibank very much. Compared to banks, they trust the cash in their hands more. What's more, taking the money directly can avoid taxes. "Did you get the money?" Seeing Kevin and the others happy, Jiang Hai also asked them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin smiled and stuffed the money in the front of her jeans, putting it carefully. It can be seen that this girl is quite concerned about this money. Then, "Old man, come and see my other fish." Seeing Kevin stay by the side, Jiang Hai also smiled and gestured to Belle on the boat to continue selling fish. The next day, Jiang Hai caught a tuna. Seeing Jiang Hai's bigger yellowfin, the fishermen's voices became louder, but the old man's eyes were shining with a golden light. Sure enough, Jiang Hai's fish is bigger, 189 kilograms, 190 kilograms, still $6 per kilogram. More than $1,000 is not a small amount, but when the third one came out, these people were even more confused. When the fourth Atlantic sailfish came out, some people looked at Jiang Hai with envy. On the fifth day, when Jiang Hai's bluefin came out, the whole fishing company was quiet. Everyone was looking at Jiang Hai and the others with eager eyes. P.S. During the commercial break, I recommend friends to act cute. Invincible Little and Little Bow's similar farming novels, Golden Ranch. I don't need to recommend Fatty's Golden Fishery, it's much more popular than mine. Chapter 493. Hey, lucky boy, if I were you, I would return to the United States immediately after accepting the money. Looking at the accounts reported to Jiang Hai after the fish were weighed, the old man couldn't help but whisper to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also looked around. As a result, he found that at this time around the fishing company, the fishermen who were originally gathered there were whispering in twos and threes. However, when they saw Jiang Hai's gaze, these people would turn their heads away. Although Jiang Hai didn't study psychology, he heard that when someone actively avoids your gaze, if this person doesn't like you, then this person has a guilty conscience. These fishermen naturally can't like Jiang Hai, so they have a guilty conscience. Why would someone who has never met feel guilty? That is, he is preparing to do something that he is guilty of. What? Is Puerto Rico also so lawless? Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai chuckled, then looked at his harvest today. Jiang Hai's fish today, the two yellowfin tunas, were not very valuable. The two fish were sold for less than $3,000. However, the Atlantic sailfish was sold for a good price, a total of $13,000. This is the difference between a live fish and a dead fish. A live fish can be sold for $100,000, but a dead fish is only worth a little more than $10,000. The most expensive one was the bluefin tuna, which Jiang Hai sold for a total of $27,000. In total, Jiang Hai's fish were sold for a total of $42,890. This money is already comparable to the annual income of a middle-class family in the United States. At the same time, this money is enough for the poor Puerto Ricans to target Jiang Hai. Lawless? You can also think of it this way. This is a very dangerous place to begin with. Although it's not like some countries in South America where the warlords are divided, the government can no longer control the whole country. If something really happens to you, as long as someone pushes the blame to the Americans, what was originally a civil case may be upgraded to a political case. You know, politics is a pool of dark water, and it's not that easy to clear it up. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the owner of the fishing company here said with a smile. Jiang Hai actually understood what he meant. Although Puerto Rico wasn't exactly lawless, it wasn't that far off. The whole country was divided into three parts. The first part was the pro-government party, which accounted for the largest proportion. These people were also the people who wanted to be integrated into the United States the most, so these people were envious of Jiang Hai, but would not do anything to him. The other group of people were those who didn't care. These people weren't short of money. They didn't think that not being annexed to the United States would have a big impact on their lives. Therefore, these people were basically the kind of people who abstained from voting during the election. The third part was the people who did not want to be integrated into the United States. Some of these people were nationalists, and some were people who held power in their hands. Now, it could be said that they held the power of life and death here. However, once they were integrated into the United States, everything would be done according to the rules of the United States. There would be elections and democracy, and then the power in their hands would disappear. Therefore, these people were the people who were most unwilling to be integrated into the United States. These people wanted to find people who would support them, and those desperados and extreme nationalists were their best choice. These people were basically in jobs that were not very good, and they did not earn much money. For money, they would do anything. Fortunately, such people were only 5% of the people in the country. However, there were also 1.8 million people in Puerto Rico, and 5% of the 1.8 million people were only 90,000 people. If they were spread out across the country, naturally, it was not a lot. However, it was hard to say if 90,000 people were to deal with Jiang Hai. If something really happened to Jiang Hai here, the Puerto Rican government only needed to say that these people were against being integrated into the United States, and the United States would basically let it go, because it was impossible for them to send troops to attack Puerto Rico. At most, they would push Puerto Rico further away and prevent them from joining the United States. The Puerto Ricans had even tried to assassinate the President of the United States. In the end, other than killing a group of people, nothing else was done. That was why it was said that politics was the dirtiest thing in the world. Some people would say that if these people were against being integrated into the United States, then with the old man's identity, wouldn't he be afraid that his fishing company would be smashed? Afraid? Of course, he would be afraid. However, it was impossible for such a big fishing company to not have someone behind it. Those in power knew that if they touched these companies, the United States government would not be affected. However, it was hard to say if those mercenaries or assassins would come knocking on their door. Some money could be used, but some couldn't. If they used the wrong money, they might not be able to spend it. They weren't in the Terra Syndicate's headquarters. If I were you, I would first replenish the fresh water here, then leave and return to the United States immediately. I can guarantee your safety here, but if you go outside, I don't know. Seeing that Jiang Hai seemed to have noticed the movements of the fishermen outside, the old man did not say much. He just whispered to Jiang Hai. However, would Jiang Hai be afraid? Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai smiled softly. Thank you, uncle, but if they have the guts to come, then let them come. Looking at the fishermen outside, Jiang Hai chuckled, then took the bag of money, walked out of the sea company, and then took everyone back to the boat. After arriving on the boat, Jiang Hai also started the engine and headed to the port where he stopped last night. About an hour or so, Jiang Hai's boat also stopped at the port. The port guard captain was naturally very welcoming. After asking him to refill the boat and refuel it, Jiang Hai got off the boat with Belle Lester. As for Kevin and the others, they had already gone back. Today, they also sold the barracuda they caught. Including the yellowfin, they got a total of more than $1,000. After each of them got more than $300, they happily went home. After all, for them, they were just here to be tour guides, and other things had nothing to do with them. However, if Jiang Hai and the others were still here tomorrow, then they were willing to continue to be tour guides for Jiang Hai and the others. Tomorrow, they could go catch lobsters to eat. Jiang Hai also smiled at this. After giving each of them $100, he made an appointment to go with them tomorrow. He really didn't care about these locals. After all, their boat was not easy to deal with. If they dared to be tough, then Jiang Hai wouldn't mind letting them know how tough they were. After sending Kevin and the others off, Jiang Hai took Belle off the boat. They still had to buy other things. There was no need to buy food because there were still some leftovers from the barracuda and other fish that they had caught today after selling them off. According to Kevin and the others, Delina and Marion caught the barracuda, and it had nothing to do with them. So they all stayed on the boat. At least, they didn't have to worry about food, and there was a lot of beef on the boat. Most importantly, the food here wasn't very delicious, at least Jiang Hai didn't like it very much. They got off the boat mainly to buy alcohol. Today, they ate and drank on the boat, and they drank a lot of beer, so they just wanted to go to the bar to buy some. But when they walked into the bar, they found that the atmosphere was a little strange. When Jiang Hai and Belle entered the bar yesterday, these people glanced at Jiang Hai and the others, then they didn't care about Jiang Hai and the others. But today, many people kept staring at Jiang Hai, and their eyes were red, which made people feel very depressed. Boss, the situation doesn't seem right. Jiang Hai felt the unfriendly eyes of these people, and Belle, who retired from the Delta, naturally felt it too. He leaned close to Jiang Hai and whispered. "You have a weapon with you, right?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai smiled and whispered in a low voice. "Of course." Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Belle replied affirmatively. In such an unknown area, he must have a weapon with him. "I have one too, it will be fine." Seeing that Belle also had a weapon with him, Jiang Hai smiled, then said casually. Then, they walked to the bar counter and gently knocked on the table to call over the bartender from yesterday. 2 glasses of the wine you made yesterday, 5 boxes of beer, and a box of rum. Looking at the bartender, Jiang Hai took out a stack of Franklins from his pocket, which was one of his gains today. However, when he took out the money, he felt that the breathing of many people in the bar had quickened. Feeling this scene, Jiang Hai smiled. He just likes the feeling of walking on a tightrope. He took out a few bills and threw them on the bartender's table. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the bartender quickly put away the money and started to adjust the drinks. "If we are you, I will leave after this drink, and I will send the wine to your boat." After adjusting the drinks and serving a glass to Jiang Hai and Belle, the bartender whispered to Jiang Hai. "Why?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also raised his eyebrows and asked. "Your business in the fishing company has been spread here, understand?" Hearing Jiang Hai ask why, the bartender couldn't help but frown. Did this guy take too much medicine? It's so obvious, is there a need to ask why? "Thank you, this is your tip, remember to send the wine to my boat." Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai was still surprised, but the bartender was also kind. After taking out another Franklin's and handing it to the bartender, Jiang Hai slowly tasted the wine. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't care, the bartender didn't say anything. He had already reminded him, so it's not his fault if he didn't listen. Therefore, the bartender started mixing the drinks again and pretended not to know anything. Chapter 494. "Hey, handsome, can you buy me a drink?" Just as Jiang Hai and the others were drinking there, the crowd over there also moved. A good-looking woman walked out from the crowd. In Jiang Hai's eyes, it was not a problem for her to score 70 points. She looked very much like a very famous social butterfly in the United States, called Kim Kardashian. Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment when he saw her huge upper body and buttocks. However, the makeup on her face was a bit too thick. This woman walked to Jiang Hai's side, deliberately bent her waist, revealing her Mariana seduction, and said to Jiang Hai with a seductive face. However, Jiang Hai did not pay attention to her. He knew that this woman was up to no good, so why bother with her? What? You don't want to give me face? Seeing that Jiang Hai just looked at her and did not speak to her, the woman's eyebrows raised, and the smile on her face turned into a sneer. I know you. Do I need to give you face? Hearing this woman's words, Jiang Hai snorted disdainfully and said jokingly. At the same time, his eyes were also looking at this woman. She wants to give him face? She is thinking too much. Okay. Seeing Jiang Hai's expression, the woman also smiled, and then instantly took off her skirt, and then two huge breasts, which made Jiang Hai a little dizzy, shot in front of Jiang Hai. To be honest, Jiang Hai had seen a lot of women, but this was the first time he saw such a big one. But unfortunately, this woman did not let Jiang Hai look at her for nothing. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze, she could not help but smile, took off her clothes, and shouted loudly, "Please, this man is molesting me. Boy, you dare to touch my woman." Sure enough, when her voice fell, a very rough man had already pushed the crowd and walked out. As soon as he saw this man appear, Jiang Hai could not help but laugh at himself. Since Jiang Hai had the dragon balls, he had been avoiding melodramatic plots. Most of his decisions were difficult for others to guess the ending, but it turned out that this world was a melodramatic world. Sometimes, although you tried your best to avoid these, natural disasters and man-made disasters could happen at any time. A large pot of dog blood would fall from the sky and drench you, just like now. Seeing this guy, who was only about 1.7 meters tall, pushing the crowd and coming forward, Jiang Hai and Belle also looked at each other. After drinking the wine in their glass, they stood up. Boy, you want to run after taking advantage of me. Seeing Jiang Hai and Belle stand up, the small guy here waved his hand, and in an instant, more than a dozen guests in the bar also stood up, and quickly surrounded Jiang Hai and Belle in the bar. Run? I didn't think about it, but you can say what you want. Glancing at the people around him, Jiang Hai gently moved his neck and shoulders, and then said to the person in front of him with disdain. Most of the people from South America were not very tall. Of course, this was not absolute. For example, there were many insiders in the NBA who were from South America, but most of them were very short. The shortest region in the world, besides South Asia, is South America. Indeed, there are many tall basketball players, but their national sport, football, their height on the field is exposed. Jiang Hai is now 192 centimeters tall barefoot, and Belle is 188 centimeters tall. When he stood up, he looked like a crane in a flock of chickens. You molested my woman, it won't be that easy. How about I cripple your hands, or? Seeing Jiang Hai directly ask, the leader couldn't help but smile. Then he rubbed his thumb, index finger, and middle finger together. Jiang Hai looked at Jiang Hai and said, "Hey, do you want money? How much do you want?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai touched his nose and said with a smile, "You're quite smart, I want 20,000, no, I want $50,000. Seeing Jiang Hai take the initiative to mention money, the man's eyes couldn't help but light up, and then he said loudly. He knows that Jiang Hai is not short of money, so he has to peel off a layer of skin from Jiang Hai. He heard that Jiang Hai made nearly $43,000, so it's reasonable for him to pay $7,000. Hearing the leader's words, the dozen or so lackeys around here couldn't help but laugh. They have heard before that Americans are quite afraid of death. Are these two guys about to piss their pants? 50,000? No, 100,000. If you can't come up with $100,000 today, then I will throw you into the sea to feed the sharks. But unfortunately, they found the wrong prey. When Jiang Hai heard his words, he couldn't help but move his face closer, and then said with an evil smile on his face. What did you say? Say it again. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the people who had a smile on their faces instantly put away the smile on their faces, and the leader couldn't help but say with a ruthless face. I said, give me $100,000, or I will throw you into the sea to feed the sharks. Looking at the man in front of him, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said with a serious face, but as soon as his voice fell, the man on this side had already punched him. Looking at the fist coming at him, Jiang Hai didn't dodge, and directly took the punch. Feeling the heavy blow on his cheek, Jiang Hai smiled. Four times the physical limit of an ordinary person naturally meant that his resistance was 4 times the physical limit of an ordinary person. This punch didn't even leave a mark on Jiang Hai's face, let alone push him back. You can fight back now. Gently wiping his cheek, Jiang Hai smiled, then put away the phone that had been recording next to him. This was the evidence, and now that he fought back, it was called legitimate self-defense. Fight back, I think you are courting death, go. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the Puerto Rican gangster shouted and directly pounced on Jiang Hai, but what answered him was Jiang Hai's heavy punch. This punch hit the guy's face hard, and Jiang Hai almost instantly heard the sound of the nose and cheekbones breaking. And this person was also sent flying by Jiang Hai's punch. After flying for 3 or 4 meters in the air, he knocked over 4 tables and chairs in a row before lying down. At this time, he was lying there with his face covered in blood, and his whole person was stunned. Jiang Hai glanced at him and was sure that this guy's nose was definitely broken, and there was no escape from a severe concussion. However, Jiang Hai's punch didn't make the others stop. The remaining dozen or so guys, with the idea that many ants can bite an elephant to death, instantly rushed over. But soon, they realized that no matter how many ants there were, they were still just ants. Moreover, their numbers were not enough to make an elephant afraid. Before Jiang Hai moved, Bell had already moved. First, he directly swept down the person in front with a low whip kick, then he grabbed another person's arm and hit the person's temple with his elbow. This person also fell to the ground in an instant. Although he was not dead, he had lost the ability to fight. At the same time, he kicked back with his hind leg and instantly kicked another person in the stomach, causing him to retreat a few steps and kneel on the ground. He covered his abdomen with both hands and began to vomit, but the sour smell did not affect Jiang Hai and Bell. The two of them were like fierce tigers that had been released from their cages. They rushed towards the people who were still standing there. These people were actually just some gangsters. Usually, it was good enough for them to show off their strength. Now that they had met Jiang Hai and the others, they were really afraid, but it was useless to be afraid. Jiang Hai would still deal with them. Compared to Jiang Hai's strength, Bell's attacks were also very sneaky. He did not have the strength of Jiang Hai, but his skills were much better than Jiang Hai's. After all, he was the one who taught Jiang Hai how to fight. But now, Jiang Hai had a feeling that he had surpassed his master. There was no one under his command that could withstand a single move from him. In a few moves, these guys were directly beaten to the ground. One by one, they held their faces and their stomachs were constantly groaning. Jiang Hai liked to hit people in the face. Those who were beaten to the ground by him would definitely have a nose fracture. In less than 30 seconds, the originally arrogant people were all lying on the ground. Jiang Hai glanced at the blood on his hand and casually wiped it on the clothes of a gangster. Looking at Jiang Hai and Bell's ferocious fighting strength, the people in the bar who originally had some thoughts about fighting instantly withdrew their thoughts. Even a pestle had to be picked, but it was obvious that these two people were not pestles, but durians. If they directly went to deal with them empty-handed, it would definitely not be the durians who died, but themselves. Therefore, the other guests were either watching from the side or had already returned to the table to drink their wine. B****. Just as Jiang Hai and Belle finished off these people and were about to leave, the boss slowly got up after being confused for so long. He took out a switchblade from his pocket and cursed. With a face full of anger, he charged at Jiang Hai. His face was smashed to the point that even his own mother would not be able to recognize it. His bloodshot eyes did indeed give Jiang Hai a fright, but his reaction was not slow. Before the guy could charge at him, Jiang Hai had already pulled out the big desert eagle that had been strapped to his back and aimed it at the guy. When he saw the black muzzle in front of him, the gangster leader, who had just charged halfway, froze. "If you didn't show up, would have forgotten. $100,000, or I'll throw you into the sea to feed the sharks." Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai's mouth opened slightly. He slowly walked in front of the man and pointed the gun directly at the man's head. Indeed, Jiang Hai did not dare to kill people here, but it did not mean that he would easily let this guy go. Chapter 495. I didn't. Feeling the cold muzzle pointing at his head, the gangster's eyes, which were just blinded by money, became clear again at this time. There was no one who was not afraid of death, but some people died for their beliefs, such as our beloved soldiers. In order to protect the country, in order to protect the homeland, these people's sacrifice was glorious and heavier than Mount Tai. But some people, such as these gangsters, were just brave and ruthless. When they knew that they couldn't beat the other party and were about to die, they were very scared. Now was not the era where they shouted that they would be a hero again after 18 years. In that era, bandits also had to pay attention to a name, such as enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens, robbing the rich to help the poor, and so on. Now, this gangster was just jealous of Jiang Hai and wanted to take advantage of him. But they obviously underestimated Jiang Hai's combat power, and they didn't expect Jiang Hai to have a gun. No? Then it's difficult. How about this, according to what you just said, $100,000, or I want both of your hands. Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai was still smiling at first, but in the end, his face became serious. This. Now, this person really didn't dare to resist, he was really scared. Suddenly, he saw the woman beside him who was already trembling in fear. He remembered that Jiang Hai just took a look at the woman's plump upper body. This woman was indeed his lover, but at this time, he couldn't care so much. I'll give her to you, she's yours, you can do whatever you want. Thinking of this, the man directly pulled the woman over and stuffed her into Jiang Hai's arms, looking at Jiang Hai with a face full of desire, hoping that Jiang Hai was a pervert. I really don't like her, but forget it. She can take one of your arms, what about the other one? Looking at the huge woman in his arms, Jiang Hai was disgusted at first. He wouldn't do that with such a woman. After all, she had been with such men before. Who knew if she had some kind of disease in her body? But after thinking about it, it wouldn't be bad if he changed the way he played. Thus, he continued to point the gun at the man. If this woman was one of his arms, what about the other? I understand. Looking at the gun Jiang Hai pointed at his head, the man gritted his teeth. He picked up the dagger in his hand and stabbed it into his left arm. Blood spurted out in an instant, and he fell to the ground in pain. Looking at this person's resolute appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be shocked. It seemed that this guy was really a ruthless person. Scram! But the words were said by Jiang Hai, and he can't kill these people here. After all, Puerto Rico has its own government and laws, and it has a relationship with the United States. If he killed people and extradited them, then Jiang Hai would be in trouble. In order to avoid more trouble, Jiang Hai didn't plan to do anything to the tiger when he made a show of force. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the gangster immediately got up and left quickly with a dozen other people. Boss, are you taking her back to the ship? Seeing these people leave, Bale walked over with a smile on his face. He glanced at the girl in Jiang Hai's arms and carefully asked Jiang Hai. Although Bale wasn't a good person, he wasn't a good person. But he knows that he can't touch any woman that Jiang Hai likes. He doesn't want to lose this good job. But looking at this woman, to be honest, in his opinion, except for combat weapons, she doesn't seem to be Jiang Hai's cup of tea. Back to the ship. How is that possible? You continue to drink, and then send the wine back to the ship. Let's go out for a walk. Indeed, this woman is not Jiang Hai's cup of tea, but he won't refuse, occasionally eating fast food outside. After talking to Belle, Jiang Hai signaled with his eyes. Although the woman is still very scared at this time, her trembling body has been suppressed. She slowly moved her body and followed Jiang Hai out of the bar. Opposite the bar, there is a small town hotel. Jiang Hai and her walked in naturally. After booking the best room in the hotel, Jiang Hai took her in. Do you want to take a bath? Walking into the room, Jiang Hai asked the woman. Up to you. The woman has already known her ending at this time. Serving a man, she has done such a thing before. Her heart has gradually calmed down. In her opinion, as long as she serves Jiang Hai well, it is estimated that Jiang Hai will not embarrass her. After all, he has just let those guys go, so he shouldn't want her life. Then let's go together. Seeing that she has gradually calmed down, Jiang Hai also said casually. His voice fell. The woman over there has taken off the outer long skirt. He has to admit that this woman is really wild. She doesn't wear anything under the long skirt, and the pants below are actually lace panties. Now there is a popular knowledge, maybe everyone knows that the origin of panties is in South America. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, the woman quickly took off her clothes, then lowered her head and looked at Jiang Hai shyly. Jiang Hai was not polite. After taking off her clothes, he took her into the hotel bathroom. When the bathtub was filled with water, the two were also taking a shower. When she saw the existence of Jiang Hai, she licked her lips subconsciously. What kind of ability is there in the world? Brazilians are ranked first in the world. They are all South Americans. Other countries may not be so terrible, but they are not bad either. The same is true in Puerto Rico. Before today, this woman only heard that Asian men are not very good in that aspect, but when she saw Jiang Hai, she found that she seemed to have gained something. Under the signal of Jiang Hai's eyes, she slowly squatted down. Her mouth and Jiang Hai's favorite panties also came in handy at this time. When Jiang Hai returned to the ship, it was already past 9:00 in the evening. Seeing that Jiang Hai was back, although Delina and Marian did not say it explicitly, they were both relieved. Boss, you are so slow. Belle, the only one who knew what Jiang Hai was going to do, watched Jiang Hai get on the ship and couldn't help but laugh. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes at him, then quickly walked over. Well, everyone go to sleep. I think Belle has also told you that we may be targeted, so we can't stop here tonight. If something happens, we can't even run away, so I decided to stop at sea for the night. My only request tonight is that you must all stay in the room, and never come out without my order. Looking at the several people in front of him, Jiang Hai said seriously. He was not going to delay for too long. Tonight, he was going to retrieve the sunken ship that he had his eyes on. That was his main goal. Okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone here responded. Although they didn't know what Jiang Hai was going to do, no matter what Jiang Hai wanted to do, they had to obey. With everyone's response, Jiang Hai also walked into the captain's room, started the engine, and drove towards the depths of the sea. As for Belle and others, after packing up, they took their food and drinks and returned to their rooms. Only Azalina watched everyone enter their rooms, then returned to Jiang Hai's captain's room. As soon as she walked in, Jiang Hai noticed her and immediately turned off the navigation on his mobile phone. Is there anything else? Looking at Azalina, Jiang Hai turned his head and asked curiously. But as soon as his voice fell, Azalina had already stepped in front of Jiang Hai. She didn't give Jiang Hai any chance to resist at all. Her mouth kissed Jiang Hai's lips, and her tongue officially invaded his lips. Jiang Hai was stunned at first, but fortunately, he quickly reacted and began to fight back. But just as he fought back, Azalina stepped back, then licked her lips gently. There's no strange taste in your mouth. It seems that you haven't kissed anyone, but that's not right. Judging from Bale's appearance just now, you should have gone looking for food. Looking at Jiang Hai, Azalina said with some hesitation. In terms of combat effectiveness, Azalina and Bale are about the same. Although Azalina's skills are better, her physical fitness makes her a little disadvantaged when facing Bale. But when it comes to other things, Azalina is much better than Bale. Psychology, action, interrogation, reconnaissance, wilderness survival, and so on. She is better than Bale in all aspects, let alone Jiang Hai. So when he heard her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile awkwardly. I came here to tell you that the key to my room is under your pillow. Don't always go outside, it's dangerous and dirty. Since I'm your bodyguard, I have the obligation to protect your safety, including here. Looking at Jiang Hai's slightly embarrassed face, Azalina knew that her judgment was right. Then, she rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai and said, "This guy is really interesting. He has such good quality women at home, but he still wants to go outside to play. He's crazy." After giving Jiang Hai one last squeeze, Azalina wandered back to her room. Looking at her figure, Jiang Hai couldn't help but touch his nose. Wait until I have time. He also knew that Azalina was right. It's not a good idea to always go looking for food. Moreover, there are many women around him who can help him, but most of them are difficult for Jiang Hai to cross the threshold in his heart. Take Aphrodite and the others for example. After all, they used to. So they can't do it. And Delina and Marion are his daughters. They should be able to do it with Shtwani Clive, but now the problem is that there are some uncertainties with Shtwani Clive. Therefore, Jiang Hai was also a bit depressed. When he was depressed, time passed by quickly. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed by. At this time, the ship's bell rang. He knew that he had arrived at his destination. Chapter 496. Plop. With a splash, Jiang Hai entered the water again. As the bubbles around him gradually disappeared, Jiang Hai also turned on the headlamp in front of him, then he swam quickly towards the deep sea. Jiang Hai was familiar with doing this. After all, he had gone to the sea twice last time. He was very familiar with the activities in the sea. He didn't plan to get the treasures in the water in one day. He went down today to check it out. If there was not much in this ship, then there was no need for him to take it. He was wearing the thickest protective swimsuit with an iron wire net on the outside. He carried 2 fishing guns on his back and an underwater pistol, which he had specially brought along. Other than that, there was also a metal bag used to store samples. After upgrading to a dragon, Jiang Hai really found that he had changed a lot. In addition to the physical fitness that he said at the beginning had become 4 times the human limit, his spiritual sensitivity had also increased greatly, and the release of spiritual energy were his new abilities. However, what Jiang Hai was most concerned about was his ability to move underwater. In his manner, he had already tried it. After going into the water, he still didn't need to breathe and ignored the water pressure. The most important thing was that his body, which was originally slow underwater, was now like an underwater dragon at this time. Although it was still not as good as the swimming masters like sailfish and tuna, it shouldn't be slower than the average boat. For example, tuna, the fastest speed of this fish can reach 160 kilometers per hour. Of course, the speed won't be maintained for long. After all, fish are cold-blooded animals. If the blood is too hot, it will burst the blood vessels. But even so, the cruising speed of this fish is about 60 to 80 kilometers per hour. According to the calculation, 1 nautical mile is about 1.8 kilometers, which means that it can swim about 33 nautical miles per hour. This speed is no slower than Jiang Hai's yacht at full speed. It beats almost 90% of the ships. Even warships are rarely so fast. If it was during World War II, this speed would almost beat the Earth in seconds. Jiang Hai's current speed is far from so fast, and his cruising speed can't be compared. He can swim about 10 nautical miles per hour at full speed, but this is already very fast. 1 nautical mile is 1,800 meters. Jiang Hai can swim 18,000 meters per hour while ignoring the water pressure. Even the Mariana Trench is not so deep. This is not slow for Jiang Hai. He dived into the water. With his current perception, physical fitness, swimming speed, and most importantly, his weapon, unless he encounters some unknown creatures, ordinary sharks are really not his opponents. Even if there is something he can't handle, don't forget, he can release spiritual energy, and he can forcibly take the other party as his underling. Therefore, Jiang Hai's speed after entering the water is extremely fast. In less than half an hour, he has already arrived at the location of his target. Under the illumination of his headlamp, a shabby Spanish galleon like a ghost ship appeared in front of him. In the history of Europe, from 1500 years ago, it can be regarded as the era of the village chief's hegemony. Because the whole of Europe is not very big, there are only a few people in total. Today, you fight me, and tomorrow, I fight you. The relationship is also somewhat intricate. It is somewhat like the period before the Qin dynasty in the earliest Huaxia. During the period of hegemony, there are many marriages between each other. Today, you fight one family, tomorrow, you fight another family. It is very chaotic. However, after 1500 years, Columbus turned everyone's attention to the distant American continent. From then on, the original hegemony of the village chief has become the strongest existence in the world who has the most colonies in the world. The strongest of the first generation is the Spanish. It is not because the Spanish are very powerful, but because they have mastered a kind of sailing technology. This kind of sailing ship is called the Spanish galleon. This ship is the second strongest ship in the world at that time. The only ship that is stronger than this ship is Huaxia's Zhenghe treasure ship. However, the Huaxia people are not interested in the expedition to Europe. During the Ming dynasty, except for Zhu Di who has some interest in overseas, the following emperors are not interested in Europe and the world. Instead, they are more interested in immortal cultivation, alchemy, and carpentry. Of course, this may be because they have no choice. Because in the Ming dynasty, although the emperor is the unified monarch, he himself does not have much power. Some are like the current constitutional monarchy of the United Kingdom, where all the power is controlled by the cabinet. For example, the famous Zhang Zhuzheng and others are actually like Prime Minister Cameron of that era. In fact, they have the final say in the Ming dynasty. They can ignore or reject the emperor's words. It is precisely because of this that there are more eccentric emperors in the Ming dynasty, and the main theme of that era is Qingzhou Confucianism. These officials didn't have any sense of crisis. What they paid attention to was the eight-legged ethics and the like. Therefore, they have no idea about expanding overseas. This also caused Huaxia to miss the second opportunity to rise. Of course, this is all in hindsight. Who knows what will happen if Huaxia really launches an attack? But it is undeniable that the reason why the Spanish dominated Europe for 200 years is because of their ship, the Spanish galleon. It can be said that before the appearance of the steam engine, this ship is a giant on the sea. It has a strong load capacity, strong wind, strong defense, and fast running. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is today's aircraft carrier. At that time, almost all the pirates were proud of a Spanish galleon. At this time, in front of Jiang Hai, is a Spanish galleon. The owner of this ship is not the Spanish government at that time, but a pirate. Bartholomew Roberts. Speaking of this name now, 11 out of 10 people may not know who this person is. However, 300 years ago in the Caribbean region, it could be said that in the entire Europe, there was no one who did not know him. Because he is also a legend. Roberts was born in 1682 and died in 1722. He only lived for 40 years. But in these 40 years, he became famous. He first worked as a sailor on an armed slave ship. The business he did was not good. His main job was to transport slaves from Africa to mine gold or grow cocoa. But later, he was robbed by pirates. After being robbed, the pirates wanted to kill him. This made him very scared, so he told the pirates not to kill him. He wanted to join the pirates, and the pirates also need to replenish their manpower, so he agreed. This guy was also very smart and slowly made a name for himself among the pirates. Until he joined a pirate named Davis. When he was in Africa, he was killed by the natives. He killed his way out, and finally became the captain. His first battle as the captain was when they quietly came to the coast of Brazil and attacked a Portuguese fleet with 42 ships. The victim would never have thought that he would be robbed in such a large fleet. When he came back to his senses, he had already escaped with 40,000 Brazilian gold coins. This was also a reassurance to his men. Later, his pirate team grew bigger and bigger. At its peak, there were more than 400 ships, but it was because he was too strong. Furthermore, he did not have the backing of the government. This caused public anger in the Caribbean Sea. In the end, in the morning of 1722, he was attacked by his own country, England. He was hit by shrapnel and died on the spot, ending his sinful life. The reason why he was remembered was mainly related to his style. This guy was particularly shameless and sour. He usually liked to wear a black suit and wear jewelry all over his body. He never drank and liked to drink tea. The most important thing was that he believed in Christianity. Not only did he believe in it, but he also let his men believe in it. He even organized a church band. Although he always wanted to let the people of the church become pirates, the people of the church would not do it. He did not succeed until he died. And according to the current saying, he was full of flavor, especially good at pretending, and especially sour. It was precisely because of his style that people gave him the nickname Black Baronet. The ship that Jiang Hai was targeting today was his ship, but it wasn't his flagship. It might be a big ship or something like that. It was just a ship that was accidentally sunk when he came to South America to fish for money. According to the map that Jiang Hai bought, there were a lot of treasures hidden on this ship, but it was not clear if there were any left. Looking at the giant ship in front of him, according to the description at that time, it was indeed a giant ship. Jiang Hai slowly leaned over and gently grabbed the edge of the ship, then slowly turned over and jumped on. He had to admit that this ship was well protected here. Unlike the last ship that Jiang Hai saw, which was badly rotten, this ship basically maintained its original appearance. It was not stuck in the trench, but fell directly to the bottom of the sea. The bottom of the sea here was only so deep. After Jiang Hai turned over and got on the ship, he deliberately stomped his feet. The deck of the ship was indeed shaking, but it did not break. It seemed that the wood of this ship was really rare. It was more than 300 years, and it had not rotted to the roots. It was really not easy. After confirming that there was no problem with the ship, Jiang Hai also took out his weapon. Holding the spear gun with both hands, he slowly walked down to the bottom of the ship. Although there were many buildings on the top floor, it was obvious that there was no treasure that Jiang Hai wanted. There was a tattered wooden sail that had long rotted away, and a small house that had long been broken into pieces. There was nothing to see. Slowly walking to the stairs, Jiang Hai first threw a light stick down. In an instant, a lot of fish were scared away by the light thrown down by Jiang Hai. However, these fish were just some small fish that Jiang Hai had seen last time. Chapter 497. In fact, there were many creatures in the deep sea, especially fishes and eels. If you look at them carefully, you will feel that these guys are terrifying, but if you zoom in to look at them, they are just ordinary. Because they are located in the deep sea, these fishes have particularly good eyesight, and sunlight can't shine in here. Therefore, these fishes' eyes are unusually big to capture light sources. Their mouths are also unusually big, so they look like monsters, but who would catch them and look at them carefully? At least, Jiang Hai didn't have such an idea. He went to the second floor of the cabin. Just like the cabin that Jiang Hai encountered last time, the second floor is the first floor under the plate armor. This is where the sailors live. Although this ship is not as old as the previous one, it is almost 100 years less, and it is relatively well preserved. Jiang Hai threw a light stick into each room. After making sure that there was nothing left, he would enter. After a brief search, he would leave. This floor really didn't have much profit, only a few gold coins. Jiang Hai had no choice but to throw a light stick into each room. Jiang Hai threw a light stick into each room. After confirming that there was nothing left, he would enter. After a brief search, he would leave. This floor really didn't have much profit. After reaching the end of the second floor, Jiang Hai went down to the third floor. The third floor is where the treasures are. Generally speaking, if a Spanish galleon is a merchant ship, it has the lowest configuration, 2 layers of plate armor. But generally, after becoming a pirate ship, it will have 3 or even more layers. Jiang Hai doesn't know how many layers it has at most. But at least the ship in front of him has 3 layers of plate armor. The third floor is where the treasures are placed. It is also the place with the best protection. After Jiang Hai walked to the end of the second floor, he found that the third deck is actually closed. It seems that when the ship sank, the exit was not opened. Jiang Hai used his own strength to open the exit, but as soon as he opened it, some wood chips and some dust-like things rushed up in an instant. Dodging the dust that has accumulated for many years, Jiang Hai waited for the water to clear again before walking to the entrance of the third floor. Jiang Hai threw down a glowing stick, but as soon as he threw it down, a layer of fine goosebumps instantly appeared on his scalp. Because at this time, there were countless human skeletons at the entrance of the third floor, after being soaked in seawater for so many years. Most importantly, although the third deck was isolated from the fishes and the like, the insects on the third deck certainly wouldn't let go of these bodies. At this time, all of these people had their mouths wide open. Their empty eyes were staring at the exit of the third deck. Jiang Hai couldn't help but imagine what would happen next. It was very likely that the fourth floor of the ship, which was the water storage, was hit by the cannonball, and then the ship sank. And these pirates were very likely originally guarding here, or wanted to take advantage of the sinking ship to make a fortune and then escape. However, they didn't know who blocked the exit to the third floor. Before they could escape, they were locked up here. The water directly flooded in and drowned them all. From their open mouths, it could be seen that they were drowned. Looking at the dozens of complete skeletons below, Jiang Hai took a deep breath. Although looking at the scene in front of him, he was a little panicked. How can you catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? So Jiang Hai slowly walked down from the second deck. After gently kicking away the skeletons piled up on the stairs with his feet, Jiang Hai walked into the third deck. The layout of the third deck was somewhat similar to the pirate ship Jiang Hai entered last time. Unlike the second floor, there were many cabins and the like. At this time, there were only 2 huge rooms. According to the rules of the last time, Jiang Hai first opened one. As a result, after the fluorescent stick went in, he found that there was nothing special here. There were only a small mountain of gold coins and some jewels pushed there. In the other room, Jiang Hai was looking forward to it a little. He also hoped that he could get a pile of treasures like the last time, but unfortunately, there was nothing here. It was also a small mountain of gold coins and jewels. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai sighed a little. This time, there was nothing like the king's armor, which proved that the income was reduced. But then he shook his head. Although there was no big profit, if he could sell these things, it should be worth a lot of money. At least it could be worth about 500 million. This time, Jiang Hai didn't prepare to leave with just one ship. One ship was 500 million, 2 ships would be 1 billion. The only thing he needs to pay attention to now is whether his yacht can hold so many treasures. There is also the problem of sales. Of course, he still asked Moses Adams to contact the auction house. Jiang Hai won't cooperate with others to do this business. It's not like he can't do it himself. There is no need to look for partners and share their money. After recollecting his mind, Jiang Hai took his bag. After filling it with treasures, he returned to the ship. The things he packed were not without a goal. He will still be here for a few days. It's impossible to get the treasures here on the ship today. In case he encounters some intentional robbers or the American Coast Patrol, it will be easy to get into trouble. If it's only a small amount, then he can say that he bought it. After all, he is a local tyrant. But if it's a large amount, then there is no way to explain it. So he has to prepare all these things. He will come back to get these things on the ship and then bring them back to the United States. The things he packed now are more representative of these things, such as some gold coins, some jewelry, and so on. After he takes these things, he will appraise them to see how much they are worth and estimate the value of the pirate ship. After taking the things, Jiang Hai returned to the plate armor. Then, with a kick of his legs, he instantly rushed to the sea level. After his figure left, behind the ship, a huge figure slowly floated over. Then looking at the deck passage that has been opened, this huge figure actually went directly into the deck entrance that looked much smaller than it. It seems that the next time Jiang Hai comes, there will be a guest waiting for him. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't feel that at this time, because he was already swimming quickly to the sea level. After swimming for about 30 minutes, Jiang Hai's head came out of the water again. Looking at the still calm yacht in front of him, Jiang Hai quietly climbed onto the ship and then went into his room. After changing everything, he also threw the bag he took out on the floor. Then he called Delina and Marian, and the three of them studied it together. This time, the gold coins Jiang Hai brought up were still Spanish gold coins. After all, Spain was the king of the world at that time. So, the gold coins they produced were very versatile and valuable, just like dollar was now. It was far from being comparable to the gold coins of England and France. Of course, it was different after the 18th century. There were no gold-producing countries in South America. There were only silver-producing countries here, such as Chile and Peru, which were rich in silver. Compared to South America, the United States was a gold-producing country. There was also the famous South Africa. Of course, there was also Huaxia. Huaxia's gold production was currently the highest in the world, but the country had already started to mine it in a limited way. After all, if they kept mining like this, they would run out sooner or later. After cleaning up these things, Jiang Hai took out his camera and took some photos of these things from different directions. Then he sent these photos to Moses Adams via satellite. Although it was midnight, Moses Adams was still a very good professional lawyer. Moreover, he also knew that working for Jiang Hai naturally had its benefits. After receiving these photos, he immediately used his connections. He went to find some experts to appraise Jiang Hai's things. Later, the experts confirmed that the gold and silver coins Jiang Hai took were indeed Spanish gold coins, and the gems were about the same quality as the gems from last time. According to the experts' estimates, Jiang Hai's gems were worth about $1 million. When he received the news, it was almost dawn outside, but Jiang Hai was still very energetic. He calculated in his heart. The things he took were about 1% of the value of a room. These things were worth more than $1 million, so the things in one room were worth about $100 million. 2 rooms meant $200 million. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai smacked his lips in disappointment. But in any case, having money was better than nothing. He had originally thought that the things on this ship would be worth at least $500 million, but now it seemed that he had taken it for granted. Of course, this was only the estimate of the experts. According to Moses Adams, if these things were sold to an auction house, the price would increase by 20 or 30%. It would definitely increase by 20% to 30%. But even so, 200 million was only between 240 million and 260 million. Jiang Hai's heart was now big. Although money was just a bunch of numbers, he still hoped to get more numbers. After hiding the gems, Jiang Hai restarted the engine and headed for the town from last night. At the same time, he also took a nap in the captain's cabin. By the time he returned to the town, it was already past 7 in the morning. Kevin and the other 2 girls had been waiting here for a long time. At first, they thought that Jiang Hai and the others had run away. But they were unwilling to go back just like that, so they waited here for a while. It was precisely because of this wait that they saw Jiang Hai and the others. As soon as they saw Jiang Hai's yacht approaching, they excitedly waved their hands. "Girls, where are we going today?" As the yacht approached the port, Jiang Hai went to wash his face and walked up to the plate armor. Looking at the 4 girls in front of him, Jiang Hai asked them with a smile. Chapter 498. Let's go catch lobsters today. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl here said with a smile. Obviously, they didn't go into the water yesterday, which made them feel a little regretful, but if they go fishing for tuna, they will be attacked, but if they go to catch lobsters today, it doesn't matter. Catch lobsters? Hearing their words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then his brow frowned slightly. What's so fun about this? He caught this thing almost every day in the manor, and he has lost interest in it. Yeah, the lobsters in the Caribbean are still very good. You can catch them and try them, but the price is very low, unless you can get the king shrimp. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin and the others here were very excited. Well, let's get on the boat. Looking at their excited look, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. He suddenly remembered that he didn't really come here to play, he came here to make money. Since they said that they want to catch lobsters, then let's go. Not yet, we have to buy some scuba tanks first, like this, otherwise, you won't be able to get off the boat. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin shook her head, then took out a pair of diving goggles from the bag and put on a small respirator. Of course, they can't really go down with an oxygen tank. Their so-called scuba tank can be said to be a small oxygen tank. It's not right to call it an oxygen tank because it contains air, and it can be breathed a dozen times in the mouth. In this way, people can stay underwater for about 10 minutes. If it's someone with a large lung capacity, it's not a problem to stay underwater for 15 or 6 minutes. Of course, if it's pure oxygen, it's also possible to stay underwater for 20 minutes. However, although Puerto Rico belongs to the United States, it's not as easy to buy oxygen here as in the United States. In fact, even in China, oxygen tanks are not expensive, but if you want to get oxygen, it's not easy to get it unless you're sick or know someone. Jiang Hai's boat naturally has no oxygen, but he is also quite interested in this scuba tank. Although he doesn't need it, he still has to pretend in front of others. Hearing Kevin's words, Jiang Hai asked the people behind him who had woken up who wanted to go into the water. Finally, it was determined that only Belle and Harriman, who were not interested in water, would stay on the boat. The rest of the people would go into the water, so Jiang Hai went to buy 4 scuba tanks and returned to the boat with the 4 girls. It was still Kevin who led the way. Jiang Hai and the others also rushed all the way to the place where they caught the lobsters. On the way, Jiang Hai also listened to Kevin's introduction of the lobsters here. He also had some understanding of the lobsters here. In China, besides the domestic lobsters, there were also different grades of lobsters. The lobsters with the best quality were the Australian lobsters. Australian lobsters were the best in terms of quality, weight, and taste. Therefore, in China, Australian lobsters were the most expensive. Of course, Australian lobsters were also divided into different types such as green dragon, flower dragon, and so on. The prices were also different, so there was no need to break them down here. In addition to Australian lobsters, there was also a lot of Boston lobsters in China. The small ones were naturally not very expensive, around 100 renminbi per kilogram, but the big ones were not cheap. It was only a little cheaper than Australian lobsters. Otherwise, if Jiang Hai's lobsters were sold for $3,000 per lobster, the tourists would have already gone crazy. After that, there was the Caribbean lobster. The scientific name of the Caribbean lobster should be Caribbean spiny dragon, which was a type of spiny lobster. It was very common in the sea, because Australian lobsters were also in this family. However, although the Caribbean lobster was a distant relative of the Australian lobster, it was much cheaper than Australian lobsters. But this thing was much cheaper than an Australian dragon. In a restaurant, a 2-kilogram Caribbean spiked dragon could be sold for €10 or $12. Here, the price was calculated by the dollar, not the kilogram. Lobsters that were 3 to 4 kilograms were all priced at this price. The fishermen here were too lazy to catch lobsters that were less than 3 kilograms. Because the Caribbean region, such as Cuba and Panama, was in a very primitive state. They did not have much of an industrial society, so there were very few people who ate lobsters here. Basically, no one specially went to catch lobsters. Only tourists would eat them, but there were not many tourists here. This place was not as peaceful as imagined, so those who dared to come here were either brave or new people. After all, these people were very few, so the sea here was not destroyed on a large scale. The number of lobsters was less in coastal areas, but there were still a lot in some uninhabited areas. After listening to Kevin's introduction, Jiang Hai touched his chin. To be honest, he had never eaten lobsters before. When he ate lobsters, his first meal was Boston lobsters, which were the lobsters with big pincers. The Caribbean spiny dragon was the kind of lobster without big pincers. He had never eaten this kind of lobster before, so he wanted to try it this time. While driving the boat, Jiang Hai looked at other maps. He wanted to see if there were any shipwrecks near the sea area mentioned by Kevin. As a result, he really saw one, but it was a little far away. Because catching lobsters was destined to not be able to go too deep into the sea, even people couldn't bear it. And with the depth that people can dive, with the current technology, it was very easy to pull up a sunken ship. Jiang Hai's goal this time was about 40 nautical miles east of the place where he caught lobsters. It was not far, so he could come and take a look at it at night. Driving the boat, Jiang Hai looked at the sea while paying attention to his coordinates. After arriving at the sea area specified by Kevin, Jiang Hai also stopped the boat. As the boat stopped, everyone ran out of the cabin. When they came out, Jiang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up. Not only did the 4 girls change into bikinis at this time, because the water was not very deep, so it wasn't very cold, so they didn't need to wear thick clothes such as diving suits. An ordinary bikini was enough, and Jiang Hai had already seen the bikini swimsuit show of the 4 of them yesterday. Now he was looking at Delina and Marion. They were naturally not the main focus, but Azalina. Azalina was indeed a legendary Eastern European and Soviet girl. When Jiang Hai first saw her, his first impression was that she was thin, but later on, his impression was that she was strong, but now she looked really attractive. Her white and tender skin, long blonde hair, high nose, and deep blue eyes formed an 80% face. In addition, she had stayed with Jiang Hai for so long, and she also ate Jiang Hai's beef and fish every day. Her body had already recovered to its peak state, and the streamlined muscles on her slender legs looked very beautiful. That perfect V-line and 8-pack abs, a slender waist that was narrower than an A4, and 2 long, straight legs. What's more, the dark blue bikini on her body was really tempting. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze lingering on her, Azalina couldn't help but smile. This was also a good thing. Jiang Hai looked at the 3 girls in front of him and said seriously, "Well, let's get ready to go into the water. But after going into the water, you must listen to me. You must not be too far away from me, and don't touch anything." Jiang Hai looked at the 3 girls in front of him and said seriously, "Of course." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delina and Marion immediately responded. They had dived in Jiang Hai's manner before, so they naturally knew that it was actually very dangerous underwater. There were many poisonous animals, so they had to be careful. What's more, they were in a very strange sea area, so they had to be more careful. "Then let's go." Seeing that everyone was ready, Jiang Hai repeatedly told them what to pay attention to, then nodded and jumped into the sea first. After looking around the sea and confirming that there were no other harmful organisms in the water such as sharks, Jiang Hai also made an okay gesture towards above. Closely after that, they all jumped into the sea. After entering the water, people who have dived before know that it takes a certain amount of time to adapt. Although Jiang Hai and the others didn't dive very deep, the water pressure was still very uncomfortable, so they needed a little bit of time to adapt. Therefore, they circled about 2 meters below the water surface for a few times. After about 5 minutes, they resurfaced and filled with air again. After that, they officially dived to the bottom of the sea. When they reached the bottom of the sea, Jiang Hai smiled. As the bubbles in front of him disappeared, a perfect coral reef appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai had always been a little depressed, because he also had coral reefs, but most of them were gray. It was the most common coral. It looked quite spectacular, but it was not beautiful. It was not like what he saw now. It was really beautiful. The corals in the tropical sea could be said to be one of the most beautiful scenes in the world. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people diving in Australia's Great Barrier Reef every year. Although the Caribbean Sea wasn't as famous as the Great Barrier Reef, it also had its own flavor. Jiang Hai glanced over and saw a large piece of coral, but compared with his own gray coral, this one was much more beautiful. Purple, yellow, pink, colorful, all kinds of corals appeared in front of Jiang Hai. There were even a lot of red corals, which were quite valuable in China. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but sigh. It was indeed a tropical sea area. It was much better than his own cold sea area. On these corals, there were many sea anemones and the like. Many of them were like clownfish, butterfly fish, and the like. They shuttled back and forth among these sea anemones, and some other creatures were also wandering around. It was a perfect ecological environment. Chapter 499. Standing there, Jiang Hai kept looking at the underwater scenery in front of him. Although the underwater scenery in Jiang Hai's manner was not bad, it was still inferior. But compared to this place, it was indeed much worse. At least this place could be sold as a tourist attraction. As for his place, hee. Not to mention selling it as a scenic spot and opening it to others for free, if he didn't allow people to catch fish, no one would go there. However, no matter what, Jiang Hai still had to think of some ways to make his underwater fishery more beautiful. It seemed that he would have to waste a lot of spiritual energy again. At this time, he found that Kevin and the others who had dived into the water had returned. He glanced at his watch. It turned out that he had been in a daze for about 10 minutes, and Delina and the others had also returned. Seeing that each of them was carrying 2 big lobsters in their hands, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Looking down, sure enough, there were many big lobsters crawling in the crevices of the coral reef. Seeing this, Jiang Hai shrank his body and instantly swam straight into the crevices under the sea. Seeing Jiang Hai's speed, although Jiang Hai didn't swim at his fastest speed, Kevin and the others were still shocked. Jiang Hai's swimming speed was too fast. Even some old fishermen couldn't swim faster than Jiang Hai. If Jiang Hai were to participate in the Olympic Games, he would definitely win a medal. In fact, they didn't know Jiang Hai well. If Jiang Hai wanted to, he could win anything, let alone a medal. Almost turning his body, Jiang Hai dived into the coral reef in a short time. After catching 2 of the biggest lobsters he saw, he quickly rose up about 3 meters. After wandering for a while, he got on the boat. Of course, he didn't need to wander there. He did this just to make Kevin and the others feel more at ease. When he got on the boat, Belle and Harriman had already prepared the boxes, and the lobsters were also caught by them. Looking at these lively lobsters, Harriman couldn't help but laugh. He knew that these lobsters were quite delicious. Jiang Hai and the others didn't continue to get on the boat. Instead, they stepped on the water for a while and took a break. After filling the boxes with air, they dived into the water again. They couldn't just catch lobsters once. Although Kevin and the others didn't expect to make money by catching these guys, because they were really too cheap here. But since they came here, they naturally had to bring some home. Jiang Hai naturally prepared a batch of frozen lobsters. In this way, Jiang Hai's lobster catching competition began. While Jiang Hai and the others were playing here, on the other side of the earth, in a not-so-high-end wine restaurant in the imperial capital, a person hurriedly pushed open the door of a private room and walked in. "Hey, everyone, I'm sorry, I'm late, I'll punish myself by drinking 3 cups later." After walking into the private room, the man said with a smile, sat on the only empty seat, poured himself a cup, and drank it in one gulp. "Brother Zhou, you're really slow, the seafood boat you've been waiting for is already a little cold." Seeing the arrival of this person, several people on the opposite side couldn't help laughing and talking. At the same time, there were some complaints in their words. Hearing this, the person named Brother Zhou couldn't help but look at the seafood boat in front of him. A trace of playfulness flashed across his face, then he gently picked up his chopsticks and knocked on the plate in front of him with the most shell-like food. Seafood boat was actually just a name. It used a large pot, a large plate, or a ship-shaped wood, and it was filled with cooked seafood. A seafood boat could be eaten by 3 or 4 people, and the price wasn't expensive. In the capital, it was between 300 yuan and 500 yuan. It was a very popular way of eating recently. Of course, the price was different for different things. Now all the people here are Xiaobai, and their monthly salary is an average of 7,000 or 8,000 yuan. After deducting the rent, water, electricity, internet, and travel expenses to and from work, even if they have a car, they have to refuel it. They don't have much money left in a month. Although they are not particularly stingy, seafood boats are definitely delicious for them. But looking at these dishes, Brother Zhou was very pretentious and didn't move his chopsticks. "Hey, I don't have anything to eat for the time being, you guys eat quickly." Putting down the chopsticks in his hand, Brother Zhou said with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, several people next to him couldn't help but look at him. "What's the situation? Didn't you like to eat it before?" Looking at him, a person who has a good relationship with him asked strangely. "Yeah, but didn't I go to the United States a while ago? These things were almost free there. It was so cheap, so I'm tired of eating it." Hearing his words, Brother Zhou said with a calm face. "Brag, Zhou de Peo, don't talk nonsense." But as soon as his voice fell, a bad friend came to tear down his stage. "Hey! You don't believe me, let me show you the photos." In fact, Brother Zhou had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. He took out his mobile phone arrogantly, then clicked on the photos and showed them to the people next to him. Sure enough, the people in these photos were all Brother Zhou, and in the photos he clicked on, they were naturally all seafood. The big prawns were Arctic prawns, each of them was the size of a palm, and the scallops were full of meat. They were more than a size bigger than the scallops in front of them. The oysters were really free, they were just pushed over there. The most eye-catching thing was the big lobster, and there was more than one. These people were a little stunned. Then look at the small seafood boat. It has to be admitted that sometimes, the boat of friendship capsizes, and the boat of seafood capsizes. Let me tell you, the place I went to is called Winthrop. Have you seen these big prawns? $2 per caddy, that's $4 per kilogram. They're all live, so $4 is only about 20 yuan. You can buy 2 caddies of them, and they're all wild. The prawn meat is called bouncy, and the prawn brains are called plentiful. If you don't want to, you can go to a restaurant and buy them. There's an Italian restaurant over there. The scallops are just there. You can eat as much as you want for $3. Oysters are even more free. This crab, this cod, this squid, this salmon. They're as cheap as you can get. Look at this sea cucumber, this abalone, heh. Hearing this person's words, many of the foodies present couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Indeed, If this guy wasn't bullshitting, then these seafood were more than half cheaper than in China, at least 2/3 cheaper, or even more. Finally, they saw the big lobsters. Brother Zhou, these big guys are much cheaper than in China, right? Pointing at the largest lobster among them, one of them asked Brother Zhou carefully, but his eyes were full of envy. This one, it's not bad. This one is the king of lobsters, and this one is only 32 catties. It's not a lot there. Look at this person. Brother Zhou glanced at the lobster on his phone, then pretended to be calm, but in fact, he was overjoyed. This guy's acting was really comfortable. He happened to see Jiang Hai in the photo, so he pointed at him. This guy is the richest man in Winthrop. He's a Hua Xia, and this is my brother. This lobster, two-headed abalone, and sea cucumber are all produced by him. He has a big manor there, and he raises cows. Such a big lobster, let alone other things, in China, you can't eat it without at least 100,000. But over there, just mention my name and it's $3,000, which is less than $18,000 to $20,000. I'll send it directly to the hotel to cook. Of course, the main purpose was to praise Jiang Hai. Then, Brother Zhou talked about the lobster. When they heard that such a big lobster only cost $20,000, many people were tempted. Of course, for white-collar workers like them, of course, they weren't willing to eat a $20,000 lobster by themselves. But if a few people pooled their money together, it was still not bad. Brother Zhou just said that the lobster was 32 catties. Even if it was only 20 catties without the shell, it wouldn't be a problem for 10 people to eat it. In total, each person would only spend a little more than $1,000. It was too tempting to eat such a big lobster with only a little more than $1,000. At that time, many people were tempted, but there were still a few people who weren't tempted. After all, not everyone was a foodie. There were always some people who didn't like to eat. But when these people saw that in addition to the ingredients, there were many other photos. There were photos of playing at the beach, catching fish in the sea, riding a horse, shooting a gun, and party photos. For a moment, everyone's eyes were attracted by the phone. One topic after another was thrown to Brother Zhou, and Brother Zhou also told them one by one. For example, the clothes he was wearing now were more than 1,000 yuan in China, but they were more than 100 yuan there. When they went to the beach to play, it was all free. When they went to the sea to catch fish, the food they ate on the boat was all free. When they went to ride horses, it was almost as cheap as playing for free. Most importantly, how many men did not like guns? Although there was no shooting range to play with guns there, you could shoot freely in the shooting range. Only bullets cost money. Playing with guns was free. You could play with any gun you wanted, from rifles, pistols, shotguns, to assault rifles, machine guns, and sniper rifles. As long as you could move, you could play with it. At the end of the day, it would cost about $100. It was fun. Looking at these photos, Brother Zhou instantly became the focus of these people. Originally, they were looking forward to and wanted to eat the seafood boat, but at this time, they were left out, especially after these people asked about the price. Including accommodation, round-trip tickets, and travel expenses, it was only 8,000 per person. It was really cheap. Chapter 500. While Brother Zhou was being pretentious, many people in the capital were being pretentious as well. There were only 3 places that had planes from China to the United States: the capital, Shanghai, and Yuezhou. This group of tourists was actually from the capital, so the people they pretended to be pretentious were all from around the capital. Many people wanted to go and take a look after sensing that these people's 13 slots were full. The world was so big, they had to go and have a look. Not long after the first group of tourists came back. Many people came to the travel agency, intending to take a look before signing up for a trip to Winthrop. Some of these people were going for the first time, and some had already booked a place for the second time. Originally, this travel agency planned to prepare for a week after returning, and then finalize the itinerary in another week. That is, they would go after half a month. However, just a few days after returning, when Jiang Hai was still traveling along the United States waters, the travel agency's phone almost exploded with calls. A large group of people also came to their original location. These people came to ask and even asked to go to Winthrop, which made the person in charge of the travel agency a little confused. By the time he came back to his senses, he had already organized a second group to head to Winthrop's. Naturally, Wu Shan and the others were still leading the group. From the time they got off the plane to the second group's departure, it only took 5 days. That is to say, before Jiang Hai arrived in Miami, the second group had already arrived. This time, the number of people was 86. Winthrop was already experienced, so they immediately arranged a car to pick them up. And after these people arrived, their friends' circle of friends naturally went into an uproar. Jiang Hai's manor was still the focus of these people's attention. Many people came here to eat the seafood in Jiang Hai's manor. Edward Anderson and the others also got authorization from Jiang Hai before Jiang Hai left, so they could also sell the seafood. However, everything must be accounted for. Jiang Hai can allow them to eat as much as they want, but he can't allow these people to sell the seafood in his manor and stuff the money into their pockets. This was a matter of principle, not a matter of money. Fortunately, Edward Anderson and the others knew this very well. Moreover, Jiang Hai had already told them that they would get a 20% share of the seafood sold. A lobster was $3,000, and they could get $600. What else could be more tempting than this? So naturally, Winthrop's reputation and influence in China exploded again. The second group of tourists hasn't returned yet, but the third group of 102 people came. This time, Jiang Hai's villas can no longer be lived in. The people who opened the hotels also started to make money. Although it was impossible to charge more than Jiang Hai's seaside villa, or even half the price, for them, it was just a matter of getting something for nothing. It was really profitable. Unknowingly, Winthrop became the best choice for many people who came to the United States to play. It was 13 square meters high, had delicious food, and was very cheap. The scenery was picturesque, and there were many things to play. For people in China, Winthrop had a lot of charm. At the same time, because of these people's publicity, many people who studied in Boston also knew about Winthrop. They really didn't know that there was such a fun place near them, so there were the first group of people who drove to Winthrop. For a time, Winthrop was not only popular in China, but also in the United States. When Jiang Hai started to dive and catch lobsters in Puerto Rico, the fourth group of tourists went abroad. The fourth domestic tour group had already set off. There were 124 people in this group. In less than a month, Winthrop had received about 400 Huaxia people, and dozens of Americans had also gone to visit them. Although the visitor flow was not very high, it was a heavy blow to the Boston Tourism Bureau. They were beaten until they were stunned for a moment. What was going on? Originally, Winthrop was not a very attractive place in their eyes. In other words, it was not a good tourist attraction. At the same time, they decided not to develop Winthrop to give face to their colleagues. Of course, Jiang Hai and Mayor Wallace bypassed the Boston Tourism Bureau to modify Winthrop themselves. This was also one of the reasons why they were unhappy with Winthrop. But now, what is going on? How can Winthrop accept 400 Huaxia tourists in a month? Of course, 400 people was not a lot, but that was only the people in one tour group. If there were 10 people, that would be 4,000 people. Even if Winthrop only had half a year to play, 10 tour groups would still be able to accommodate more than 20,000 people. If a tourist spent $1,000 here, it would be more than $20 million. Just thinking about it made their kidneys hurt. American politics did not allow them to have a subordinate relationship. In other words, the American government could not control the state government, and the state government could not control the municipal government. Winthrop was not under the jurisdiction of the Boston Tourism Bureau. Even if it was, it had nothing to do with the Boston Tourism Bureau. It was the only place where they could make money. This was the problem with the tour groups. But the problem was that they did not promote them. In other words, these tour groups were found by Jiang Hai and had nothing to do with the Boston Tourism Bureau. As mentioned earlier, every level of government was not subordinate to the Boston Tourism Bureau. Even if they paid taxes, the national tax was paid to the American government, and the state tax was paid to the Massachusetts government. It had nothing to do with the Boston Tourism Bureau. The rest of the money belonged to the town hall. Seeing that Winthrop was popular, the Boston Tourism Bureau officials were stunned. After discussing it for a few days, they felt reluctant to give up on this big cake. So, they took the initiative to discuss with Mayor Wallace if they could invest more in Winthrop and promote it. Then, they could get a share of the pie. But Mayor Wallace did not care at all. In the beginning, he was also very worried about these Huaxia tourists. He was afraid that they would not be willing to spend money here and that they would not want to come. After all, Huaxia did not have a beach. Why did they have to come here? But when the number of tourists came up, he knew that Jiang Hai was right. He just had to do what Jiang Hai said. What Boston government? Who cares about them? Therefore, the people they sent were ruthlessly rejected. Only Jiang Hai did not know about this. If Jiang Hai knew, he would probably open a bottle of red wine to celebrate. For the time being, they did not care about Winthrop. Jiang Hai and the others had already caught a lot of lobsters in the sea. After catching enough to eat, Jiang Hai and the others stopped catching and began to play by the sea. On such a hot day, it was very comfortable to soak in the sea. After swimming for half a day, Jiang Hai and the others were also a little hungry. They swam back to the boat and made a dish of baked lobsters because they caught too many lobsters. Because the Caribbean lobsters here grew everywhere throughout the year, their sizes were really not small. The food that they picked wasn't small. But even so, the smallest one weighed about 6 jeans, while the big ones weighed about 13 or 4 jeans. These big ones were caught by Jiang Hai and the others. Delina and the others couldn't swim underwater with these guys. 13 or 14 kilograms of lobsters were directly chopped off with a knife. If people in China saw this, they would probably be scolded to death. One must know that lobsters also have a lobster brain. Most importantly, although the spiky dragon didn't have pincers like the Boston lobster, it still had a lot of meat inside its barbed tentacles. This meat was worth a lot of money in the country. But here, no one cared about this. The heads of the lobsters were directly thrown into the sea. Naturally, there would be fish to eliminate them. As for the tail of the lobster, it was cut from the middle, then a thick layer of cheese was placed on it and placed in the oven to bake. After taking it out and eating it, the taste was quite irresistible. Even Kevin and the others ate it with a happy face. There was no other way. Although there was no shortage of lobsters in Puerto Rico and they could eat it whenever they wanted, the cheese here was very expensive. Basically, the cheese that could be bought here was made in the United States. The cheese on Jiang Hai's ship was bought from Zhang Dihai's Shanghai supermarket. None of them were made in the United States, they were all original goods from Europe. Everyone knew that cheese was naturally better in Europe. In the past, Jiang Hai did not have many opportunities to eat cheese in China, but he liked to eat pizza. After arriving in the United States, naturally, he would eat all kinds of cheese. It was only after he arrived here that he realized that cheese wasn't something that could be casually used. For example, cheese was used on pizza, salad, or bread. They were all different. In summary, the most famous cheese in the world, for example, the French's favorite cheese was Byron cheese, followed by Bosworth cheese. This cheese was made from goat's milk, so it was not as sour as yogurt. It had a soft taste and was quite good. Next was cheddar cheese, which was made in the United Kingdom. It could be eaten directly as a seasoning, and it tasted very good. Next was red county cheese, which tasted a little sour and a little salty. To be honest, the taste was a little strange. There was also Carmanta cheese, which was the cheese in Tom and Jerry's. The pits on it were due to fermentation. It was very hard, but it had a strong fruity taste. It tasted very good. Those who liked it would like it very much. Those who did not like it would not like it. Next was mozzarella cheese. Anyone who ate pizza knew this kind of cheese. This kind of cheese was the special cheese for pizza. Pizza made with other kinds of cheese was not pizza. This kind of cheese had to be eaten with pizza. In addition, there was Stilton cheese, Red Lister cheese, Vensler cheese, and so on. Jiang Hai had everything here. Chapter 501. Hello, boss, when are you coming back? The grapes in the vineyard are almost ripe. Listening to Aphrodite's voice on the other side of the phone, Jiang Hai's heart couldn't help but soften. In fact, the relationship between him and Aphrodite, it's a mess. But this is just talk. If you really want him and Aphrodite to confirm something, he can't be sure. It should be soon, that is, we will be returning in the next few days. After shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to Aphrodite on the other side of the phone after shaking his head to get rid of the unrealistic thoughts in his mind. After giving a rough date, he hung up the phone. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai has now left the Winthrop Manor for more than half a month. He spent 7 days circling the east coast of the United States, then stayed for a day in Miami, then came to Puerto Rico. After resting for a day, he went tuna fishing on the first day, lobster on the second day, and tuna fishing on the third day, but changed his position. On the fourth day, because he was a little bored playing at sea, he went to San Juan to officially say goodbye to Kevin and the others. In fact, the reason why Jiang Hai came here was mainly because he had found the location of the 3 sunken ships nearby. But unfortunately, these sunken ships were not as good as the previous one, and there were no rare treasures in these sunken ships. Moreover, most of the things were still gold coins and silver coins, and even gems were very few. If the first ship is worth 200 million, then the next 2 ships are only worth about 300 million. Together, the 3 ships are worth 500 million. This is still 500 million short of the gap in Jiang Hai's heart. Now it seems that if Jiang Hai's goal is only tens of millions, or even hundreds of millions, then fishing for the treasures on these sunken ships is still very good, but if the gap is so big, fishing for the treasures on the sunken ships is a bit unrealistic. After all, not all sunken ships have a Spanish golden armor on them, right? So after finding the 3 ships, Jiang Hai went around to the Caribbean Sea to look for other ships there. After arriving in San Juan on the 4th day, he still played around in the city. At night, he sailed away from the port and went to a place about 170 nautical miles away from San Juan. According to the mark on the sea map, there is a sunken ship here. After Jiang Hai went to the sea, he found that this sunken ship is a bit interesting, because although there are still gold coins and gems on the ship, they are piled up in 3 rooms. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, the things on this ship are worth 400 million. In this way, his money should be almost complete. The 500 million yuan from before, plus the 400 million yuan here, should be enough. Since the location has been determined, Jiang Hai didn't hold back. The next day, they were still in San Juan, but at night, Jiang Hai quietly went there and skillfully brought the treasures up. This time, except for Belle Lester, the other 4 people helped. Halleman's mind was simple, and since Jiang Hai told him not to say anything, he wouldn't say anything. Jiang Hai trusted Azalina very much, and as for Delina and Marion, there were very few people in the manor who knew Jiang Hai's secret. Jiang Hai didn't hide anything from them. Of course, he didn't say that he didn't trust Belle, so he let Belle go to San Juan for fun. According to him, this was to let Belle relax, and Belle wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. When the ship sailed back the next day, Jiang Hai's bottommost cabin was already filled with gold coins and gems. The next day, which was the 6th day since Jiang Hai came to the Caribbean Sea, he returned to the dock where he first landed. Then at night, he went to the third sunken ship to get the things on it. Then on the seventh day, he got the treasures from the lobster. According to his estimation, he should go and get the last ship tomorrow, which was the first ship that Jiang Hai found. After getting the ship, Jiang Hai would return to Miami. Moses Adams had already contacted the people in Phillips. These people were quite satisfied with Jiang Hai's arrival, because they knew that as long as Jiang Hai came, he would bring them great wealth. Naturally, they didn't dare to say much, and had prepared enough security forces. After everything was done, Jiang Hai stayed at the dock for another day. After buying a lot of souvenirs, he sailed back to the first place when night fell. This time, Belle was also on the ship, and this was the only time he was on a ship. However, Jiang Hai didn't let him out of the house. Although Belle felt that Jiang Hai was treating him differently, he didn't care. Because he knew that sometimes, the more he knew, the easier it was for something to happen. It was better for him to know less. After everything was arranged, Jiang Hai put on his equipment, carried a large bottle of oxygen in a lot of bags, and dived into the deep sea. This time, he was really familiar with the place. After all, he had just been here not long ago. In less than half an hour, he had already seen the ship. After getting on the ship, he walked towards the second floor, but when he came to the second floor, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. This was because he clearly remembered that when he first came here, there were a lot of small fishes on the second floor. But at this time, these fishes had disappeared, not even insects could be seen. This made Jiang Hai's brows wrinkle. "What's going on?" he muttered in a low voice. Since Jiang Hai had the dragon balls, he was very sensitive to these kinds of dangers. He threw a fluorescent rod down, and after waiting for a long time, there was no movement. Jiang Hai slowly walked towards the second floor, but when he reached the second floor, there were indeed no fish nearby, no fish at all. In addition to the fish, there were no other animals. The only things that grew here were the seaweeds and moss. As Jiang Hai entered the water, the seaweeds were constantly swaying, setting off an unusual atmosphere. I saw a ghost. Although there was nothing on the second floor, Jiang Hai felt that his heart was constantly thumping. He knew that this was a feeling of nervousness and fear, but except for the first time in the water, he hadn't felt like this for a long time. He felt as if there was something terrible waiting for him at the end of the corridor. This made him a little depressed. He was a materialist. He didn't believe in ghosts or gods at all. Although there was no way to explain the dragon balls on his body, and there was no way to explain the dragon skeleton that he found at the beginning. But he believed that even if there were ghosts or gods in this world, he was the only one. There was nothing supernatural in this world, and he was not afraid of the creatures in the natural environment. Moreover, this place was only so small, and the corridor was only 2 meters wide. What kind of monster could there be here? Sharks. It's not like he hasn't killed them before. Not to mention ordinary sharks, he even killed a group of hammerhead sharks. Now, even if there was a great white shark, he was not afraid. What's more, if it was really a large shark, it would be strange if it could move here. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai's mood also became relaxed. I'm not afraid. Patting his cheeks, Jiang Hai walked forward again, but he had already taken the spear in his hand. He walked to the end of the second floor, but there was nothing here. This made Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at the third floor. It seems that the feeling of danger came from the third floor. Sure enough, when Jiang Hai's head looked at the bottom of the third floor, he was surprised to find that the skeletons that were originally under the bottom of the ship had all disappeared, not a single bone was left. Seeing this, Jiang Hai instantly felt a chill running from his back to his scalp. The 36,000 pores on his body opened in an instant, and the cold juice was squeezed out of his forehead. But he was now in the water, and as soon as the juice appeared, it was taken away by the water. This made Jiang Hai also forced himself to calm down. Picking up a fluorescent stick, Jiang Hai threw it into the third floor. But after waiting for more than 10 minutes, there was no movement on the third floor. This made Jiang Hai puzzled, but also a little relieved. It seems that even if the skeletons suddenly came back to life, they shouldn't be on the third floor. Maintaining a very fast heartbeat, Jiang Hai slowly touched the third floor, but looking at it, the third floor was still the same as before. This made him feel a little strange, but now wasn't the time to explore what happened here. Jiang Hai quickly went to the two warehouses and threw a fluorescent stick inside. After confirming that there was nothing inside, Jiang Hai went into one of the warehouses and began to put things inside. The warehouse was quickly filled up. Then he went to the plate armor and put these things on it. Then he went to the third floor and continued to put the treasures in the room. Nothing happened while he was putting them, which made Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel that he was thinking too much. The treasures in this room were almost the same as those in the previous room. Jiang Hai had more than a dozen large bags of treasures. Therefore, he was able to sweep the room clean. In the end, under Jiang Hai's sweeping, all the treasures in the room were swept clean. But just as he was about to carry the treasures, suddenly, a black shadow slowly passed through the door of the treasure room and appeared behind Jiang Hai. Then this black shadow slowly rose. When it rose to about 3 meters high, it suddenly whipped at the back of Jiang Hai's head like a stick. At this critical moment, Jiang Hai's super perception played a key role at this time. He instantly pulled up a bag of treasures beside him and threw it behind him. With a muffled bang, the bag of treasures was scattered by the strange thing. Jiang Hai got an opportunity and turned his head. When his headlamp shone on the black shadow, Jiang Hai couldn't help but take a deep breath. At the same time, another black shadow slowly rose behind him. Chapter 502. F***CK, is it an octopus? Or a squid? Looking at the monster in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but think. He saw that the monster in front of him wasn't actually a whole body, but a single tentacle. But even this tentacle was 3 meters long, and the whole tentacle was as thick as the largest baseball bat. The most important thing was that this tentacle was covered with fist-sized suction cups, and in each suction cup, there was a sharp claw with barbs like fangs. After being hit by the treasure that Jiang Hai threw out, this tentacle instantly entangled the bag of treasure and directly tore it into pieces. The net made of pure metal was as weak as a plastic bag under its strength. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai knew that the fear in the depths of his heart should come from this monster. Looking at this monster with a 3-meter-long tentacle in front of him, who knows how big this monster is? So Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to fight it head-on, but wanted to sneak away quietly. But just as Jiang Hai was about to leave the room, suddenly a stream of water came from behind him. He didn't have time to look back and instantly fell forward, dodging the attack behind him. When he looked back, another tentacle had already unknowingly drilled out from a hole on the other side of the room, almost wrapping him up. And just as Jiang Hai fell to the ground, the original tentacle seemed to know that Jiang Hai was lying there. In an instant, it rolled over again. Looking at the two tentacles in front of him, Jiang Hai instantly pulled out his 2 harpoons. At the most critical moment, the 2 harpoons were also launched. Only to hear 2 clanging sounds, the harpoons carried the 2 large tentacles directly into the room. At this moment, the whole ship shook. But Jiang Hai didn't care so much at this time. He didn't want the treasure anymore. He bent his back and ran out of the door. But as soon as he went out, he saw countless tentacles rushing in from the entrance of the 3rd and 4th floor. Looking at the tentacles rushing towards him, Jiang Hai didn't have the leisure to chat there. He immediately swam forward at the fastest speed. Yes, he has already started swimming, not walking. In the blink of an eye, he had already reached the entrance of the 3rd floor. After going up to the 2nd floor, he didn't run to the 1st floor, because at this time, those tentacles saw that there was no way to catch up with Jiang Hai directly. They had already changed their direction. Whether it's an octopus or a squid, they are all very stupid. But sometimes, a stupid method is more powerful than a smart one. For example, now that it knows that it can't catch up with Jiang Hai, it might as well directly destroy the ship. So when Jiang Hai arrived at the second floor, 3 tentacles forcibly broke the rotten wood of the second floor and blocked in front of Jiang Hai. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai's original plan couldn't be carried out, but this didn't mean that he would be captured without a fight. He had already seen the situation here when he came in. How could he give this guy such a chance? In an instant, Jiang Hai swam into a sailor's room next to him. Without saying anything, he directly kicked the wall of the sailor's room. With a loud bang, the wall of the sailor's room was shattered by Jiang Hai's kick, and he instantly swam out of the sailor's room. Feeling that the prey had swam away, the monster in the sailor's room couldn't help but become angry. It began to shake violently. How could this 300-year-old shipwreck withstand the shaking of this monster? After shaking a few times, Jiang Hai only heard a loud crack. The shipwreck had been directly shaken into pieces by this monster. In the muddy wood fragments and sand, a giant monster slowly appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Squid, giant spear squid. Looking at the emergence of the giant beast, Jiang Hai couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He felt a bit of pain in his throat. He could feel that he was really in trouble this time. Giant spear squid, scientific name king sour squid, was the world's largest mollusk and the most famous deep-sea monster. It was mainly distributed in the Antarctic continent, but after all, this thing was alive, so it would sometimes wander around. South America, South Africa, and even New Zealand had traces of it. This monster could grow up to more than 20 meters long. Obviously, in the past, Jiang Hai had never thought that this was a serious matter. This was because he had encountered king sour squid when he was diving. The largest one was about 5 or 6 meters long. He had even solved one before, but now he believed in it. Because at this time, in front of him was definitely a grandfather's king sour squid. Its whole body was dark red, as if it had been smeared with blood. Its whole body was at least 23 meters tall. King sour squid was born quickly, but it also died quickly. An average king sour squid only had a lifespan of 450 days, but Jiang Hai felt that at that time, this guy would definitely have lived for more than just a year. Otherwise, with this guy's small brain, how could he think of tactics? This was all hunting experience. As this giant monster broke free from the pirate ship, this guy's big shining eyes also stared at Jiang Hai. Looking at this guy, Jiang Hai's first thought was to run, but the problem was, could he run? His maximum speed was 10 nautical miles per hour. At this speed, he could still run when facing ordinary sharks and the like. But facing this guy, he really had no confidence, but now even if he had no confidence, he had to try. Jiang Hai took a deep breath and looked at the giant monster slowly swimming out of the sand. His body flashed, and in an instant, he rushed towards the sea surface. But just as Jiang Hai thought, this guy was not going to let go of Jiang Hai, this delicious snack. As this king sour squid spat out a stream of water, it flew out from its original place like a torpedo in an instant. It did not give Jiang Hai a chance to think at all. When Jiang Hai turned his head, he had already seen its big eyes upside down moving forward. Seeing this, Jiang Hai did not say anything and immediately turned around. At the same time, he reloaded his spear and shot it at its eyes. However, the king sour squid's protection of its eyes was extremely strong. In an instant, it swung its wrist and used one of its tentacles to block Jiang Hai's spear. Although the tentacle was pierced, it was only limited to that. At the same time, its remaining tentacles were like blooming chrysanthemums, wrapping around Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai looked at the incoming tentacles and the faintly visible giant mouth in front of him. His original self-confidence was shattered at this time. He originally thought that after reaching level 3, he could go anywhere in this sea area. Now it seemed that he was too naive, really too naive. Looking at the giant mouth in front of him, Jiang Hai shot another spear, but it was blocked by the tentacles again. Jiang Hai pulled out the gunpowder weapon that he originally carried, the underwater pistol, at this time. However, although the bullets could injure this guy, they were not fatal at all. Squid were mollusks. Even if they were cut into pieces, they would still live for a while. Therefore, if one wanted to kill it, there was only one way, and it had only one weakness. One was to exhaust it, like a sperm whale, and the other was to directly hit its otolith. However, this guy was more than 20 meters long, and its otolith was only the size of a pinky fingernail. How could one hit it? Therefore, Jiang Hai fired all the bullets underwater, but it was only a stalemate for a moment. In the next second, a tentacle instantly wrapped around Jiang Hai's waist and sent him into this guy's mouth. Feeling the sharp claws on the tentacles scratching him painfully, Jiang Hai could not help but think sorrowfully. Could it be that this book ends here? Looking at the giant mouth that was getting closer and closer to him, a thought flashed in Jiang Hai's mind. However, as soon as this thought flashed, he suppressed it. What a joke. The female lead had not been decided yet. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai instantly took off his gloves. His right hand instantly pressed on the slippery tentacle wrapped around him. Then, the thin spirit energy instantly entered the body of this giant spear squid. As the spirit energy entered, the giant spear squid that originally wanted to eat Jiang Hai could not help but be stunned. A pair of big fluorescent eyes stared at Jiang Hai. Just like this, after Jiang Hai and this big guy looked at each other for 5 minutes, the big guy's eyes suddenly changed. Jiang Hai felt that it seemed to be smiling at him because the appearance of its eyes changed. Then, the big guy's tentacles slowly moved Jiang Hai from its mouth to its eyes. After deliberately rubbing its face against Jiang Hai, it slowly let go of its tentacle. It's working. Escaping from death, truly escaping from death. Looking at the appearance of the giant spear squid, Jiang Hai let out a long breath. He really did not think that he could actually escape with his life like this. It seemed that modern equipment was useful, but when it encountered a giant beast, it was useless. The most useful thing was still his own spirit energy. This was the best thing to play with. Taking a deep breath, Jiang Hai put his hand on the head of this giant spear squid again. This time, he directly used 2 pieces of spirit energy and injected it into the body of this giant spear squid. In total, he used 3 pieces of spirit energy, and these 3 pieces of spirit energy were equivalent to 9 pieces of spirit energy in the dragon stage. This spirit energy was enough to benefit this giant spear squid a lot. Looking at this cheerful squid, Jiang Hai could not help but touch his chin. It seemed that he had the most powerful bodyguard. After playing with this guy for a while, Jiang Hai went back to the broken sailboat and picked up the bags again. But this time, he did not have to carry them. The giant spear squid had become Jiang Hai's little brother. After taking the initiative to take the bags, it floated to the surface with Jiang Hai. After telling the giant spear squid to lie under the bottom of his boat, Jiang Hai carried these bags back to the boat. As soon as he got on the boat, Jiang Hai let out a long breath. Tonight was too exciting. Chapter 503. Mr. Jiang, we have appraised this batch of jewelry. The total market value is about $900 million. We still need to calculate the specific price. Are you going to sell it or let us auction it? Sitting in the VIP lounge of Phillips Auction House in Miami, the Arabian who had a relationship with Jiang Hai asked Jiang Hai with a smile. His flattering look was quite nasty. I'll sell it to you directly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai muttered in his heart. He still has 800 million yuan, but 600 million yuan will be taxed next year. He still has 200 million yuan left. Including 900 million yuan, that would be 1 billion yuan. He can spend 1 billion yuan to buy 1 billion yuan of oil futures, and then he can use the remaining 100 million yuan as his usual mobile cash. Well, I'll do it. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the salesman also smiled and went to the side to make a phone call. Looking at him, Jiang Hai also leaned his head back on the sofa and began to close his eyes to rest. Moses Adams, who was beside him, was also sitting there calmly, waiting for the contract to be signed in a while. Jiang Hai was really tired right now. Of course, he wasn't referring to his body being tired. With his physical fitness that was 4 times the limit of a human, it wasn't easy to tire him out. The tiredness he was talking about was the mental tiredness. It couldn't be helped. After all, no one would feel relaxed after experiencing the fierce battle last night. However, the only good thing was that this guy had now become Jiang Hai's bodyguard. Thinking about it, if Jiang Hai wanted to salvage shipwrecks in the future, with such a big bodyguard, it would be much easier for him. Except for the giant sperm whale, this guy was definitely the strongest existence in the sea. With such a strong bodyguard, Jiang Hai could escape into the water if he could not beat others. The water was his world. After dealing with the big squid last night, Jiang Hai let it attach to his ship and set a target. After returning to Miami, he first put the things into his room, then called Azalina, Delina, and Marion. After classifying and counting the treasures, he took the other hidden treasures into his room alone. After a night of sailing, they had arrived in Miami early the next morning. Moses Adams had already talked to Phillips and came to the dock to pick up Jiang Hai and the goods. Only Jiang Hai got off the ship. The others stayed on the ship, but Belle, Harriman, and Azalina each received $1 million. Needless to say, they knew what the money was for. It was hush money, or a fee for their hard work. This was why Belle was willing to know nothing. While these people were resting on the ship, Jiang Hai went to Phillips's auction house with Moses Adams. After nearly a day of counting, they soon gave Jiang Hai a number that he had in mind. Since it was not the first time they had worked together, Moses Adams would keep an eye on it. The rest had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. Despicable Mother AI, Eagle honored, honored honored, honored honored, honored honored, honored honored, honored honored, honored honored, Despicable Mother AI. While Jiang Hai was resting with his eyes closed, his phone rang. It was a song by an American rock band called Maroon 5. It was a new song released last year. The name was Beast, a Gwinnett. Of course, this song was not what Jiang Hai liked. It was because Kevin and the others liked it. Children at this age liked rock music the most. After hanging out with them for a few days, Delina and Marion also started to like this song. Therefore, regardless of whether Jiang Hai was willing or not, they changed Jiang Hai's mobile phone's ringtone to this song. Jiang Hai usually didn't change his mobile phone's ringtone, it was always them who changed it. Sometimes, when the music played, Jiang Hai didn't even know that it was his mobile phone that was ringing. When the song rang, Jiang Hai was startled. He picked up the phone and looked at the name on it. Jiang Hai was a little surprised. "Hello, Du Feynman, why are you calling me?" After glancing at the name on the phone, Jiang Hai thought for a moment before answering the call. Yes, the person who called was none other than Du Feynman. "Hey, bro, I'm very sad to hear you say that. In my opinion, we are friends." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman laughed and said. Hearing his hearty laughter, Jiang Hai chuckled. Is this guy my friend? Perhaps, but Jiang Hai did not think that there was any real friendship between them. Well, bro, why did you call me? It can't be just to exchange pleasantries, right? Hearing Du Feynman's voice, Jiang Hai laughed and said. If he really called just to exchange pleasantries, then he did not care. I just want to ask about you. Of course, I also have some small matters to discuss with you. I heard that you recently got a batch of treasures. Oh, my God, I'm a little envious of you. You're the illegitimate son of God. The goddess of luck must have an affair with you. Hearing Jiang Hai's laughter, Du Feynman also laughed and said. Well, am I the illegitimate son of God? I don't think so, because I'm a pure Huaxia. As for the goddess of luck you mentioned, if she is really a beauty, I don't mind having an affair with her. Hearing Du Feynman's words, Jiang Hai chuckled. In fact, he had already guessed that Du Feynman would definitely know about him selling his treasures in Phillips. I'm calling to tell you that your batch of jewelry has been intercepted by me. I think I need these things more than Phillips. As for the money I'll give you, I may not have 900 million in cash, but I can take out 1 billion in oil futures. I wonder if you're interested? I remember you once said that you wanted to buy some more, so I'll buy it with these. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin also laughed, and then said seriously, 1 billion in oil futures? Are you sure? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai could not help but frown. Originally, he wanted to buy these things, but this guy actually took the initiative to send these treasures to Jiang Hai. This made Jiang Hai a little confused, because he never believed in the saying of a pie falling from the sky, because the pie was very likely to be a trap. Even if Jiang Hai's batch of jewelry was sold separately, it would probably not be sold for 1 billion. After all, there was not much room for gold and silver coins, and there was a large quantity of them, so these things basically had a price. Under such circumstances, Du Feimin was actually willing to take out 1 billion in oil futures? Jiang Hai felt a little incredulous. After all, there was no oil in 10 years that did not have a beneficial price. His 1 billion in oil futures would at least have a beneficial price of 20% to 30%, which was 2 billion to 3 billion. He did not believe that someone would give him $4 for no reason. So as soon as Du Feimin's voice fell, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. Hey, brother, that thing is very valuable in your eyes, but in fact, in our eyes, it's not very valuable, at least not as valuable as Nahi, right? Listening to Jiang Hai's doubts on the other side of the phone, Du Feimin said with a smile. If this is your final answer, then I'm very happy to sell it, but are you sure there are no additional terms? Hearing him say this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, and asked Du Feimin on the other side of the phone with some confusion. Of course, that's that. If there's something, I'll look for you directly. This is not a prerequisite for the deal between us. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin said directly. If that's what you said, of course I'm willing. I'm in Miami now, when can you come over? It would be a waste not to take advantage of the situation. Jiang Hai had already made it very clear that he said there were no additional conditions, so Jiang Hai didn't care. I'm still in Dubai. You know, I'm discussing the oil transfer with people in your country. I can't go to the United States now, but my lawyer is there. He has full authority to discuss this deal with you. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was amused. It seems that this guy really doesn't care about 1 billion in oil futures. He just sent a lawyer over. It's $1 billion, not 1 billion Korean won or 1 billion Vietnamese dong. This money is not a small amount, even for these rich people, at least for Jiang Hai. This is 1/3 of his net worth, but it seems that he really doesn't care. It doesn't matter, but I still think it's better to talk to you in person. Shrugging, Jiang Hai said to the other side of the phone. That's true. After all, I don't trust others to manage 1 billion yuan. How about this? Didn't I say that I was going to visit you? On August 24th, I'll be going to Atlantic City in the United States to watch a UFC fight. When that time comes, I'll drop by your place. If you have time, you can come over and sign the contract with me. As for this batch of jewelry, you can store it in Phillips for now. Don't worry, it's free. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin on the other side of the phone thought for a moment and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai thought for a moment. It was already August 15th, August 24th, there were only a few days left. After he sent these people home, he would personally make a trip to Atlantic City. The last time he went, it was because of Pra Walton, but the two inexplicably had a relationship. To be honest, Jiang Hai actually wanted to avoid her, but to be honest, he was still quite interested in Atlantic City. After all, it was the second largest gambling city in the United States, and he had never been there in his life. It was good to go once in a while. And most importantly, he was going there to discuss a deal worth more than 1 billion. Chapter 504. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor, Nyoibo Studio. The morning sun shone on the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. A large fishing boat was slowly moving through Sandy Bay with a boat full of tourists. A large trawler was also working behind their boat. The tourists had never seen such a boat before. One or two of them leaned against the side of the boat, watching the waves that the boat stirred up or the small fish that jumped out of the water from time to time. Of course, more people were keen to take photos there and post them on their WeChat moments when they returned to the hotel. A Huaxia SIM card could not be used in the United States, unless you had an international call card. Only then would you be able to make calls and surf the internet in the United States. However, not many people knew how to make calls and surf the internet. Many people from Winthrop were living a good life that they could never have imagined before. For example, the fishermen who drove fishing boats. For example, the people who opened horse farms and hotels were all earning a lot of money. In less than a month, they had earned more than what they had earned in an entire season. Although it was tuna fishing season, many Winthrop fishermen did not go to Cape Cod to participate in the annual feast. In their opinion, they would be working there day and night for 2 months, and it would be extremely hard. It would be good if they could earn $100,000 from a single boat. If they wanted to hire someone, they would have to pay at least $20,000. The remaining $80,000, after paying 35% of the national tax and state taxes, would be around $40,000 to $50,000. Indeed, this amount of money would be equivalent to their annual income, but they did not need to suffer this time. They could earn money by staying at home. Why would they go there and suffer? Just like now, they could go to Winthrop every morning to get people. After that, they would go around Sandy Bay and catch 2 nets of fish. One person had to pay $20 to play on the boat, which was the latest price. 10 people would be $200. Besides, there were more than 10 people on the boat every day. There were more than 30 people on the boat right now, which added up to more than $600. They could eat the fish, prawns, crabs, and lobsters that they caught. How much could one person eat? 3 kilograms? 4 kilograms? 5 kilograms. Moreover, there were old people and children on the boat. If each person was 3 kilograms, 30 people would be about 100 kilograms. With one net, they could easily catch 200 to 300 kilograms of fish. With 2 nets, they could catch at least 500 kilograms, which was 1,000 kilograms. These people would also buy the fish at a discount of 10% from the market price, which consumed another 100 kilograms. He could easily earn more than $2,000 a day by selling the rest of the goods to fishing companies. That would be $60,000 in a year and $120,000 in 2 months. Not to mention that this was a business that could last him for half a year. Even if he just lay down at home in the winter, he would still make $360,000 a month. After paying taxes, he would have at least $200,000 left. After deducting the $50,000 for gas, he would still have $150,000 left. What? Wear and tear on the boat. How much did a new boat cost? Besides, there were no strong winds or big waves in the inner bay. There was no fear of conflict, so how could there be any wear and tear? Most importantly, they didn't need to look for helpers at all. One family was enough. This way, they could save more than $100,000 a year. For fishermen, they didn't need bicycles at all. Moreover, in the winter, they could go fishing in the ocean to earn some income. Just thinking about it made them feel good. They had only heard that the tourists in Huaxia were not short of money and were very generous, but they didn't expect them to be so rich. Of course, they also knew who attracted these tourists, so Jiang Hai's reputation in Winthrop was very high. If Jiang Hai said that he wanted to be the mayor and asked the townspeople to vote for him, no matter who the other party was, he would probably get a landslide victory. Mr. Captain, are we in the Atlantic Ocean now? Just as the captain was enjoying himself, a man stood up and asked. Hearing his question, the captain slowly explained. What do you think? Hearing his question, the captain slowly explained. He knew that there were specialized translators in this team, and many of them could speak English. However, some of them couldn't speak very well. As long as he spoke slowly, most of these people could understand. We are now in the Atlantic Ocean, but not too far from the shore. This place is also called Sandy Bay. Then the captain explained what Sandy Bay was. The so-called Sandy Bay didn't just refer to a bay. There were many bays with the same name. Of course, this was not because of the same name, but because many bays were indeed called Sandy Bay. The original meaning of Sandy Bay was Sandy Bay. The so-called Sandy Bay was also called Sandy Bay, which was a bay near the continental shelf. However, the water here was generally not deep, and below it was sand. There were no reefs or corals. It was suitable for playing and catching fish, but not suitable for a harbor or diving. There were many sandy bays not only in the United States, but also in China. In Jiang Hai's fishing ground, in addition to the corals, the sandy bay where Edward Anderson took Jiang Hai and the others to catch fish was his sandy bay. However, at this time, Jiang Hai's sandy bay had become a seaweed forest, which was also the favorite place for his fish to play. Of course, the place where they were now was not Jiang Hai's sandy bay, but a private place. Wow, look, what is that? Just as the captain was explaining the composition of the sandy bay, a tourist suddenly exclaimed. Hearing his exclamation, the captain couldn't help but look back, which made him frown. Although there was still a lot of fog on the sea at this time, he could see that it should be a ship, and it's not slow. If it was just a ship, then he wouldn't care, but the problem is that this ship is moving very fast, and it's coming towards him. He is not afraid of hitting his ship, but if it scares away his fish, then it will be troublesome. Fortunately, when he saw the other party also saw him and slowly slowed down. As the ship broke through the fog, the captain also saw the appearance of the incoming ship. When he saw the metallic and cool ship, he couldn't help but laugh, and the tourists over there began to shout and take photos. What a joke! Although many of them haven't been on a yacht before, it doesn't mean that they haven't seen it before. A yacht, a real yacht, and it's so handsome, how can they not be surprised? Hey, Jiang, welcome back. Seeing that the two ships were about to pass by each other, the captain here grabbed the radio in his captain's room and shouted at the other ship. Not long after, his radio also rang. Thank you, it's really tiring to play this round, how's your harvest? Listening to the slightly familiar but strange voice on the other side of the radio, the captain knew that it was Jiang Hai's voice. He and Jiang Hai didn't know each other, or it can be said that he knows Jiang Hai, but Jiang Hai doesn't know him, but now Jiang Hai can reply, which makes him very happy. Not bad, thank you for introducing the tourists. Hearing the words on the radio, the bearded captain continued. Then treat them well and let them know that our Winthrop is a good place. Hearing the captain's words, Jiang Hai also said something, then hung up the radio and accelerated towards Winthrop. Captain, do you know the owner of that ship? Seeing the ship leave quickly, the crowd reacted. A few people who were about the same age as the captain came over and asked him curiously. Of course, all Winthrop people know him, Jiang Hai, the reason why you came here is also because of him. At the same time, he is also the richest, most handsome, and most talented person in Winthrop. Most importantly, I heard that he is less than 30 years old. Hearing these people's words, the captain seemed to be afraid that others would mistakenly think that he didn't know Jiang Hai, so he deliberately introduced Jiang Hai loudly. Hearing what he said, many people's eyes lit up. Then you can ask him to let us take a ride on his yacht. Hearing the captain's words, the people here immediately asked, looking at him eagerly. If they go on that yacht, they will have something to brag about when they return home. That won't do, that's Jiang Hai's baby. Let alone you, even we Winthrop people haven't been on it. The captain shook his head. Although he bragged a little too much just now, he wasn't stupid. Asking Jiang Hai to borrow a yacht? It would be strange if he borrowed it. Then why don't you tell us more about Jiang Hai? At this time, some women came over and asked the captain with a smile on their faces. Rich, handsome, talented, less than 30 years old, and a big yacht. This made these women quite curious about Jiang Hai. Regarding the request of these beautiful women, the bearded captain smiled and said, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." Although Jiang Hai had been in Winthrop for less than a year, his deeds were very long. First, he came to the United States alone to buy a manor, then he beat up more than a dozen punks in the town alone, then he shocked the world with a beef show, funded the tourism development of the town, and defeated the Boston gang with an M134. Although this was the case, if Jiang Hai heard it, he would probably sweat to death. In the eyes of the bearded man, Jiang Hai had already become an American hero, and the most important thing was that he was very rich and not a playboy. Unlike Iron Man's Tony Stark, he was more like Batman's Bruce Wayne, except that he wasn't as dark. Under the starry-eyed eyes of these girls, the bearded man became happier and happier as he talked. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know this, because he had already controlled his boat and came to his fishing ground. Chapter 505. This will be your home in the future. Don't catch those dolphins, tuna, sharks, and other valuable things. Those lobsters, you can do as you see fit. Stopping the boat in the open sea, Jiang Hai walked out of the cabin and came to the platform. He put his hand in the water, and not long after, the huge head of the giant spear squid emerged from the water. After sending another stream of aura to it, Jiang Hai spoke to it. After this giant spear squid was taken in by Jiang Hai, he gave it a name according to convention. But with Jiang Hai's imagination, it's hard to say what he will name these guys. For example, his family's dog. And the name of this giant spear squid, Jiang Hai decided after thinking about it for 2 days. "Okay, let's go, Roger." Finally, he patted the head of this big guy. As his biggest bodyguard in the sea, Jiang Hai waved his hand, and it went deep into the sea. Now it seems that Jiang Hai's sea defense is quite good. With Big Fool and Big Fool's wife, 2 sharks, a dozen dolphins, and the addition of Roger, they should be impregnable. The reason why Jiang Hai called this giant squid Roger, and not giant squid, spear, ink, and so on, was mainly because this guy was a squid found on a pirate ship. Pirates and squids are pirates, and the king of pirates is called Gordidi Roger, so he finally decided to call this giant spear squid Roger. Watching it dive into the water, Jiang Hai also restarted the engine and moved closer to his side of the dock. By the time his boat docked at the dock, Edward Anderson and the others had been waiting for a long time. Almost everyone except Lilia and Bernice was at the dock at this time to welcome Jiang Hai back. After going out for more than half a month, it was impossible to say that they didn't miss him, and they also had a lot of things to report to Jiang Hai. The group of people returned to Jiang Hai's villa in a lively manner, and in the villa, Bernice and Lilia were also there to prepare food. Although it was only morning, everyone had breakfast, and it wasn't time for lunch yet, but it was still good to prepare some snacks. When everyone sat down, Jiang Hai and the others began to give gifts. The best gift for a man is wine, because whether it's a cowboy or a fisherman, it's good to drink. The wine he bought was South American rum. This wine is really good for Jiang Hai to drink, otherwise, he wouldn't have brought it back. 1 box for each person. Jiang Hai's gift is still very generous. As for the women, it's more local souvenirs and the like. Americans like to receive gifts, they don't care if the gifts are expensive or not. Holding the gifts from Jiang Hai and the others, they also can't put them down. After everyone was lively for a while, Jiang Hai announced that a party will be held in the square in front of his house in the evening, and they will have a good meal. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Burke Dollar and Tommy Charles went to work, Harriman and Belle also went back to rest. Even Aphrodite and the others left, because now the grapes are ripe, their work is now the busiest time. In the end, only 3 people in charge were left in Jiang Hai's villa. Robbins Garcia is in charge of the Manor Ranch, Edward Anderson is in charge of the fish farm, and Dulles Gerard is in charge of the wine. The three of them have to report to Jiang Hai about the situation of the past few days. Robbins Garcia is the first to speak, because the cows have been sold out, he has the least to do. The cows have been very calm recently, and they are growing well. The last time we concentrated on breeding, 378 cows became pregnant, and with the 986 pregnant cows we have now, it shouldn't be a problem for us to break through the 2,000 calves next year. However, the grass has been growing very fast recently. Should we start preparing to bring in new cows, or get some grass to make into green stock? You can do as you see fit. If we want to buy cows, how many should we buy? Do we still need to recruit more people? Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai thought for a while and decided to delegate the power. He seems to know a lot about raising cows. But in fact, he was just observing. Compared to Robbins Garcia's experience, he was indeed not far behind. The manpower still depends on the cows, because we work very well with those cattle dogs. If we follow the original plan and increase it to 25,000 cows, we don't need to increase the manpower, Robbins Garcia said with a smile as he looked at Jiang Hai. Okay then, let's increase it to 25,000 cows first. After August, September won't be so hot anymore, and we'll start preparing. Looking at Robbins Garcia in front of him, Jiang Hai also nodded. This amount of money was peanuts to him now. There are no problems with the fish farm these days. The main sales aspect is the tourists. Many of these tourists know about our seafood, and some of them didn't know at first, but after seeing others buy it, they joined the ranks of buying. During the days you were gone, we could sell an average of $13,720 of seafood every day. We earned a total of $219,520 these days. Seeing that Robbins Garcia had finished speaking, Edward Anderson reported to Jiang Hai. After all, this was the fish farm's first profit, and most importantly, they had sold more than $200,000 in half a month. $400,000 a month, and nearly $5 million a year, and this was only selling the leftovers. How much would the fish be sold for when they were out? Indeed, in Edward Anderson's eyes, lobsters, abalones, and sea cucumbers were all leftovers. Many of these things were not eaten by them, so naturally, they could not be sold for much in Winthrop. Not bad, keep up the good work. When this month is over, you, Tommy, Eleanor, Andrew, and Marin will each receive a bonus of $20,000. This is what they deserve. Hearing that the business of selling the fishermen was so good, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then he said happily. He did not really care about $20,000 per person, but for Edward Anderson and the others, this was a huge sum of money. $20,000 a month, and $240,000 a year. God, they had never even dared to think about it before. Robbins Garcia looked at him with envy. Because when they were selling the cows, they had already received a bonus of $200,000 per person. They had earned no less than the fishermen. I think they'll be crazy with joy when they hear the news. Hearing that Jiang Hai had given them $20,000 each with a wave of his hand, Edward Anderson laughed until he was dizzy. He knew that he did not have to play any tricks in private, because Jiang Hai would definitely not treat them badly. This was also where his confidence came from. Sure enough, as he had expected, when Tommy Charles, Eleanor Cece, Andrew Christian, and Marlon Rupert found out about it in the evening, they were so happy that they gathered around and sang and danced. After arranging the manor in the fishery, the last person to speak was Dulles Gerard. Boss, 30% of the grapes in the winery are ripe. These ripe grapes can already be used to make wine, or let them stay on the vine for a while. With the current sunshine, more than 90% of the grapes will be ripe. Should we start making wine now, or wait until then? What do you think? Looking at Dulles Gerard in front of him, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, and decided to ask this professional. Looking at Jiang Hai's eyes, Dulles Gerard almost gritted his teeth and said, bear with it. In Jiang Hai's manner, there were two main economic lifelines. One was the ranch, and the other was the fishing ground. This was inevitable. Although Dulles Gerard usually pretended to be indifferent, as if he was a noble and disdained to mix with cowboys and fishermen, in fact, he came here mainly to make money. This was inevitable. He was still very confident about this. On the first day he came here, he felt that this winery, in his hands, could make at least $1.8 million a year. This was the pure profit after excluding all the labor, sales, and so on. In his view, this was already a very profitable business, but these days, he was beaten black and blue. The cows raised by the seemingly inconspicuous cowboys could be sold for $150,000. What kind of cow was this? Was it a beef cow? It was a Taurus. At that time, the Japanese Taurus King was sold for 7.22 million yen, which was equivalent to more than $60,000 now. That was already a sky-high price, so high that it alarmed the Japanese emperor and made the emperor ban the sale of this kind of cow. And Jiang Hai was now selling a cow for $150,000. It was really a cow made of gold, otherwise, it wouldn't be so expensive. And the fishery over there, it seemed to be inconspicuous. Just by casually picking up the leftovers, it could make $5 million a year. If those big fish were to mature, how much would they sell for? Just thinking about it made his scalp tingle. So in the end, the old man panicked a little. In order to prove himself, and for the winery, he was really anxious to make money. But his professionalism told him to endure it. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't care. He didn't mind his subordinates competing with each other to make money, because in the end, he would be the one to benefit. But he minded the bad competition between his subordinates. The things were clearly not ripe and not grown well, but they were directly sold for money. The profits were not maximized, and this was what Jiang Hai couldn't stand the most. Fine work comes out of slow work. I believe in your old craftsmanship. Everything will be done according to your wishes. Looking at Dulles Gerard's slightly tangled gaze, Jiang Hai smiled. He wanted such a professional person in charge. As you wish. Hearing that Jiang Hai had given him the greatest authority, Dulles Gerard was also very touched. It seemed that Jiang Hai was indeed a very good boss, a guy who was worth working for. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.